And the third banner rose like a wound in the night, its color catching the firelight in a way that seemed wrong, as if the cloth itself had been woven from shadow and spite. The men nearest Orhan Sahib felt it before they understood it, a cold that climbed the spine, a pressure behind the eyes, the ancient animal sense that something unfamiliar and terrible was approaching. The drumbeat did not accelerate. It maintained its rhythm, patient, deliberate, as if the hands that struck it had all the time in the world and all the cruelty to fill it. Each beat landed like a hammer on an anvil, shaping the night into something harder, something sharper. Mahmud gripped his sword tighter. "Sahib, what banner is that?" Orhan Sahib watched through the smoke, and in his chest a memory stirred, not his own memory, but the memory of elders, of stories told around winter fires, of warnings passed from commander to commander across generations. The banner was black at its center, edged in deep red, and upon it was painted a symbol that Orhan Sahib had hoped never to see on a real field of war. He spoke low, and his voice carried the weight of recognition. "The Iron Covenant." Mahmud's face went pale. "That is a myth." "Every myth was once a truth that men wish to forget," Orhan Sahib answered. "Shahanshah has called upon the sellswords of the eastern passes, men who serve no flag, no faith, no ruler for longer than a season. They fight for the weight of gold and the pleasure of cruelty." Daimir Khan, still holding the creek bank, heard the words and spat into the water. "Dogs who eat any hand that feeds them." "Yes," Orhan Sahib said, "and now they march toward us under Shahanshah's coin. If they reach the creek, they will not merely cross it. They will wade through it on the bodies of our own men." The smoke thickened, turning the world into a hellscape of half-seen shapes. Enemy soldiers from the original assault were pulling back, regrouping, making way for the new arrivals. Even Shahanshah's own men seemed to give the Iron Covenant space, as if proximity to them might poison the blood. Orhan Sahib turned to Abdul Rahman. "How many pikes remain in the rear line?" Abdul Rahman's jaw tightened. "Enough to make a wall, but not enough to hold it forever." "Then we will not hold it forever," Orhan Sahib said. "We will hold it long enough." He raised his voice so the men along the creek could hear him through the smoke and the drum and the distant screaming of wounded horses. "Listen to me," he commanded. "You have fought tonight with the courage of lions. You have held a creek against numbers that should have swallowed you. I will not ask you to hold it against what comes next." He paused, and in that pause the drumbeat filled the silence like a heartbeat of the earth itself. "I will ask you to trust me, trust that I have not brought you here to die for nothing. Trust that the fire behind the enemy line was not our only blade. Trust that dawn is coming, and with it, a reckoning that Shahanshah will remember." Men looked at him with wide eyes, sweat-streaked faces, trembling hands gripping weapons that had already tasted blood. Some nodded, some prayed under their breath, some simply stared as if his voice were a rope thrown to drowning men. Then from the trees on the right a sound. Not the drum, not arrows, not the crash of shields. A horn, their horn, the call that Faladios had taken with him when he vanished into the forest with Turhan and 40 men. The sound cut through the smoke like a blade through cloth, and every man who heard it felt something ignite in the chest, not hope exactly, but the memory of what hope felt like before fear ate it. Orhan Sahib's head turned. Through the haze, shapes emerged from the tree line, not enemy shapes but familiar ones, moving fast, horses lathered, men bloodied but alive. Turhan came first, his shield splintered, his armor marked by new cuts, his face streaked with ash and someone else's blood. Behind him rode Faladios, his cloak gone, his sword still drawn as if he expected the war to chase him into the next world. They reached Orhan Sahib's position and dismounted in a spray of mud. Turhan's voice was rough but fierce. "It is done, their supply wagons burned, their grain, their oil, their extra arrows, all ash." Faladios added, his breathing heavy, "And we found more than grain, we found their pay chest. Gold and silver that Shahanshah promised the Iron Covenant, it is burning now with the rest." Orhan Sahib felt something shift inside him, a turning of the wheel, a cracking of the enemy's spine even as they tried to stand. "If the Iron Covenant's pay is gone," he said slowly, "then their loyalty is gone with it." Faladios nodded, eyes gleaming. "They are sellswords, not martyrs. Without coin they will hesitate, and hesitation in battle is death wearing a mask of patience." But even as he spoke, the drumbeat continued. The third banner still advanced. The Iron Covenant moved forward as if the burning of their supply was an insult to be answered, not a loss to be mourned. Orhan Sahib studied the advance. The sellswords were disciplined, yes, but their formation was looser than Shahanshah's regular troops. They spread wider, moved more freely, as if each man fought for himself rather than for the man beside him. This was their weakness. This was also their danger. A man who fights only for himself has no line to break, no formation to collapse. He simply kills until he is killed. "We cannot meet them at the creek," Orhan Sahib said, thinking aloud as his captains gathered close. "They will not mass on the bank like Shahanshah's soldiers. They will spread along the water, find shallow places, cross in groups. They will make the fight chaotic, and chaos favors the ruthless." Damir Khan growled, "Then what?" Orhan Sahib's eyes moved across the clearing, the creek, the fading firelight, the approaching drum. His mind worked not as a soldier now, but as a chess player seeing 3 moves ahead. "We pull back," he said, and the words tasted bitter, but necessity does not care for taste. "To where?" Abdulrahman demanded. "To the ridge," Orhan Sahib answered, pointing through the smoke toward higher ground where the forest thinned and the earth rose in a natural fortification. "If the Iron Covenant wants us, they will climb, and men who climb are tired before they fight. Men who fight tired are men who die." He turned to his captains, voice hardening into command. "Damir Khan, you will lead the withdrawal. Move the wounded first, move the supplies second, move the prisoners last. Do not run, walk. Let the enemy see us retreat with order. Let them know we are not broken." Damir Khan bowed, "By your command." "Abdulrahman, you will form the rear guard, shields and pikes. If the Iron Covenant reaches the creek and tries to cross while we move, you will make them pay for every drop of water they touch." Abdulrahman's face was grim but steady. "They will not pass." "Tamir Boga, you will take Zarkin and Kuleds and clear the path to the ridge. Cut branches, remove obstacles. If we must fight on that ground, we will fight on ground we have chosen." Tamir Boga nodded. "It will be done." Orhan Sahib looked at Faladios. "You and Tarhan will ride with me. If the sellswords break through, we will be the hammer that strikes their heads." Faladios sheathed his sword with a sound like a door closing. "Gladly." The withdrawal began. Men moved in disciplined silence, stepping back from the creek they had held so fiercely, leaving behind the dead and the dying on both sides. The water ran dark with blood, and the bodies of Shahanshah's soldiers lay twisted among the rocks like broken statues. Yaqid was dragged to his feet by Mustafa and Kuleds, his bonds cutting into his wrists, his face swollen and bruised from Faladios's blows. He stumbled as they forced him forward, and his muffled cries through the gag were swallowed by the sounds of retreat. Orhan Sahib walked past him without looking down. There would be time for the traitor later. There would be a reckoning that would echo through the camps and the villages and the roads for years to come. But now, survival came first. Behind them, the Iron Covenant reached the creek. The drumbeat stopped. In its place rose a sound that was worse, a low, wordless chant, as if the sellswords were calling upon some godless power to guide their blades. They entered the water without hesitation. They did not form shields. They did not advance in ranks. They crossed like wolves, each man finding his own path, weapons ready, eyes scanning for movement. Abdulrahman's rear guard waited. Pike tips rose like a row of iron teeth. The first sellsword reached the bank and climbed, and the pikes met him with brutal precision. A thrust to the chest, a twist, a withdrawal. The man fell back into the creek, coughing blood. But more came, always more. The Iron Covenant did not retreat when one fell. They climbed over the body. They used the dead as stepping stones. Their cruelty was not theatrical. It was efficient, like a machine designed to produce death with the least waste. Abdulrahman's men fought with everything they had, but the sheer persistence of the sellswords began to wear them down. A pike shattered. A shield cracked. A man took a blade across the face and fell screaming, hands clawing at his ruined eyes. "Fall back," Abdulrahman shouted, his voice cracking with strain. "Fall back in order, do not break." The rear guard pulled back step by step, trading ground for time. Every step cost them a man. Every man cost them blood. Orhan Sahib, moving toward the ridge, heard the fighting intensify behind him. He wanted to turn back, to ride into the fray, to swing his sword alongside his men. But a commander who fights as a soldier abandons his duty. The hardest weapon to wield is restraint. Tarhan rode beside him, reading his commander's tension. "They are holding," Tarhan said, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. "They are dying," Orhan Sahib answered, "but they are dying with purpose." The ridge rose before them like a promised sanctuary. Tamir Boga had cleared the path, removing fallen trees and sharp brush. The ground was higher here, harder to climb, and the trees were sparse enough to see the approaches. Orhan Sahib reached the crest and turned, looking back through the smoke and darkness toward the creek. He could see the flicker of torches, the glint of steel, the movement of men who refused to stop coming. "Plant the banner here," he commanded. Zarkin drove the banner pole into the soft earth at the ridge's highest point. The cloth unfurled, catching the wind, and for a moment it seemed to glow with its own light, as if the faith it represented could not be fully extinguished by night or fire or treachery. Men gathered on the ridge, forming a new line. The wounded were laid behind the front rank. The supplies were stacked where they could be defended. Altadin Saheb, his shoulder still bandaged, took position among the archers and began checking bowstrings with hands that did not tremble. Mustafa knelt beside the bound Yaqid and forced him to sit upright, facing the approaching battle. "Watch," Mustafa said, his voice flat. "Watch what real men do." Yaqid's eyes, bloodshot and wild, turned toward the ridge. He saw the banner. He saw the men forming ranks. And something flickered across his face, not remorse, not yet, but perhaps the first shadow of understanding that he had chosen the wrong side. The Iron Covenant reached the base of the ridge and paused. For the first time since their arrival, they stopped. The drum began again, slower now, as if the drummer himself was catching his breath. Orhan Sahib stood at the front of his line, sword drawn, the banner behind him. He spoke to the men within earshot, and his words were quiet enough to be intimate, yet strong enough to carry. "This ground is ours, we have bled for it. We have held a creek and burned the enemy's provisions and captured the traitor who sold our roads. We have given Shahanshah a night he will not forget." He paused, and in that pause the drumbeat continued its patient rhythm. "But the night is not over. The Iron Covenant stands below us, waiting for the right moment to climb. Shahanshah's remaining forces will regroup and come from the other side. We are between two fires." He let that truth settle, let the men feel its weight without flinching from it. "And still we stand, still we breathe, still we hold the banner that has never fallen. If this is to be our last night on this ridge, then let it be written that we did not kneel. Let it be written that we made the enemy pay for every inch with blood and bone." A murmur rose from the men, not a cheer but something deeper, a growl of resolve, a sound that came from the belly and the heart and the soul. Damir Khan wiped his axe on the grass and gripped it tighter. "Let them come," he said. "I have sharpened this all night, it would be a waste to let it go dull." Faladio stood with his sword resting on his shoulder, watching the base of the ridge where the Iron Covenant's torches gathered like angry stars. "They will test us with their best first," he said. "Sellswords always lead with arrogance. They believe their reputation will break our will." Orhan Sahib's gaze was steady. "Then we will break their arrogance." The first wave came. Not the Iron Covenant's full force, but their scouts, fast men, lightly armored, testing the ridge's defenses with quick dashes and thrown spears. They moved like shadows, appearing and disappearing among the trees. Tamir Boga's archers answered. Arrows hissed down the slope, striking earth, striking bark, striking flesh. One scout caught an arrow in the thigh and rolled down the ridge, screaming, his scream cut short by a rock. The second wave came harder. The sellswords advanced in a loose swarm, shields raised, climbing the slope with the determination of men who had been promised gold and now wanted revenge for its loss. Their weapons were varied: swords, axes, curved blades, maces, each man bearing the tools of his own cruelty. Orhan Sahib's front rank braced, pikes lowered, shields locked. The line became a wall and the wall became a promise. The Iron Covenant hit the wall with the force of a breaking wave. Steel screamed against steel. Men grunted, cursed, bled. The ridge shook under the impact, and for a terrible moment the line buckled, bending inward like a bowstring pulled too tight. "Push!" Orhan Sahib roared, stepping forward, sword flashing. He drove his blade into a sellsword's neck, feeling the hot spray across his hand. "Push them back." Tarhan was beside him, his sword a blur of silver, cutting, thrusting, retreating, cutting again. He intercepted a mace swing aimed at Orhan Sahib's head, the impact jarring his arm to the shoulder, but he held, and his counterstroke took the mace wielder's arm at the elbow. Damir Khan's axe rose and fell like the hand of judgment. Each swing opened a wound. Each wound told a story of greed and consequence. The first wave broke, the sellswords retreated down the slope, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead. They had expected weakness. They had found iron. But they would come again. Orhan Sahib knew it. Every man on the ridge knew it. He looked toward the eastern sky where the faintest hint of gray was beginning to touch the horizon. Dawn was still distant, but it was coming. The night could not last forever, no matter how long it wished to. And as the Iron Covenant regrouped at the base of the ridge, as Shahanshah's remaining soldiers began to appear among the trees on the far side, as the third banner hung like a threat against the smoke-filled sky, Orhan Sahib felt the weight of the moment settle upon him like the weight of destiny itself. He turned to Faladios. When they come again, they will come from both sides, the sellswords from below, Shahanshah's men from the far slope. Faladios nodded. We split our defense. Yes, Orhan Sahib said, you will hold the eastern approach. Tarhan will hold the western. I will stand with the banner at the center. Faladios studied him. If the center falls. Then the center falls, Orhan Sahib said, but it will not fall quietly. Faladios placed his fist to his chest once more, the gesture of a man who understood that some battles are not won or lost, but endured. They moved to their positions. The men followed, forming two lines instead of one, thinner but wider, covering more ground. The ridge became a crescent of defiance against the darkness. And then, as the drumbeat quickened and the torches below began to move upward, as the Iron Covenant prepared for their second assault and Shahanshah's soldiers formed their own climbing line, a sound rose from the distance, far, far in the distance, beyond the forest, beyond the ridge, beyond the immediate war. Hoofbeats. Not the wild gallop of a retreat, not the organized march of an army, something else, something rhythmic and purposeful like the heartbeat of a cavalry that had been riding all night. Orhan Sahib's head turned. The sound grew louder, closer, and with it came a new dust cloud on the horizon, catching the first pale light of approaching dawn. Mahmud grabbed Orhan Sahib's arm. Sahib, more enemies. Orhan Sahib watched, and in his chest, a war raged between hope and suspicion. More enemies would mean death, but more enemies would not announce themselves with such confidence. More enemies would not ride so openly into a battlefield already burning. No, this was not the approach of foes. This was the approach of something Shahanshah had not anticipated. A banner appeared at the head of the column, rising above the dust and the dawn light. It was not Orhan Sahib's banner. It was not the Iron Covenant's dark symbol. It was another standard, older, carried by men whose armor caught the first rays of sun like water catching light. Orhan Sahib's breath caught. He knew that banner. Every man on the ridge knew it. Reinforcements, allies, men who had ridden through the night to answer the call that Orhan Sahib had sent days ago, before the ambush, before the creek, before the fire and the traitor and the sellswords. Damir Khan's voice broke with emotion. By Allah, is it? Orhan Sahib nodded, and for the first time that night something close to relief crossed his face. It is Jarkada Sahib, he has come. At the base of the ridge, the Iron Covenant saw the new arrivals too. Their advance faltered. The sellswords were many things, but they were not fools. A new force on the battlefield changed every calculation. Every advantage became a question. Every question became hesitation. And hesitation, as Faladios had said, is death wearing a mask of patience. Shahanshah's soldiers farther back saw the dust as well. Their formation wavered. Officers shouted orders, but the orders contradicted each other, and the men looked to each other for guidance that did not come. The drumbeat stopped. In the silence that followed, Orhan Sahib lifted his sword high, letting the dawn light catch the blade, letting the enemy see it, letting his own men see it. This is the hand of Allah, he shouted, his voice carrying across the ridge, across the slope, into the ears of every man who fought and bled and feared. This is the answer to every prayer spoken in the dark. Hold your ground, hold your faith, the dawn has come. His men roared a sound that shook the ridge, that rolled down the slope like thunder, that struck the enemy's hearts with the force of revelation. The Iron Covenant's commander, a tall figure in black armor, raised his hand, signaling a halt. The sellswords obeyed, though their obedience was grudging, their eyes flicking toward the new force on the horizon. Shahanshah's herald tried to rally the royal troops, but his voice cracked with doubt. The soldiers looked at the approaching cavalry, at the ridge they had failed to take, at the burning supply camp behind them, and they saw not a battle to be won but a trap closing around them. Orhan Sahib stepped to the edge of the ridge, the banner snapping in the wind behind him, and he called out across the chaos, across the smoke and the blood and the bodies, his voice carrying to both friend and foe. Shahanshah, he shouted, though he knew the ruler was not there, was watching from some distant tent, sending men to die while he counted his remaining coins. You have thrown your soldiers at us like stones at a mountain. You have hired dogs to do what your lords could not. You have betrayed your own oath by sheltering a traitor. He paused, and in that pause the dawn light grew stronger, painting the ridge in gold. But the mountain still stands, the dogs retreat, the traitor bleeds, and now your soldiers see the truth you tried to hide, that a ruler who fights through treachery will die by it. The Iron Covenant's commander lowered his hand, and his men began to withdraw, not in panic but in calculation. The sellswords had no desire to die for a cause that had already paid them in fire and ash. Their contract was broken. Their loyalty was sold to no one. Shahanshah's soldiers, watching the sellswords retreat, felt the last thread of their resolve snap. A few dropped their weapons. A few knelt, most simply turned and walked back into the forest, abandoning the fight, abandoning the banner, abandoning the ruler who had asked everything and given nothing. The herald tried to stop them, screaming orders, threatening punishment. But a commander without an army is merely a man with a voice, and voices carry no weight against the silence of desertion. On the ridge, Orhan Sahib watched the enemy dissolve like smoke in wind. His men stood around him, exhausted, bleeding, alive. Tarhan leaned on his sword, breathing hard. Is it over? Orhan Sahib looked at the battlefield. He looked at the dead. He looked at Yaqid, still bound, still gagged, eyes burning with a hatred that had not diminished. He looked at the approaching cavalry under Jarkata Sahib's banner, moving closer with each breath. And he looked at the horizon, where the sun was rising, where the day was beginning, where the world was turning toward a future that this night had shaped. It is not over, he said, but this battle is won. He turned to his captains, and his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had faced death and found it waiting but not yet ready. Tend to the wounded, bind the dead with honor, guard the prisoner. When Jarkata Sahib arrives, we will plan what comes next. He paused, and in that pause the sun touched the banner, and the cloth blazed like a flame that could never be extinguished. Because Shahanshah will not forgive this night, he will come again, he will bring more soldiers, more gold, more treachery, and when he does, we will be ready. He looked down at Yaqid one final time, and his voice dropped to a whisper meant only for the traitor's ears. And you will answer for what you have done, not to me, not to this army, to the men who died because of your greed, to the families who will never see their fathers and brothers again, to the children who will grow up fatherless because you sold their future for silver. Yaqid's eyes flickered, and in that flicker, buried deep beneath the hatred, there was something else, something that might have been the first seed of fear, real fear, the fear of a man who realizes that his choices have consequences that no amount of gold can buy. Orhan Sahib straightened and walked toward the center of the ridge, where the banner stood, where the sun was rising, where the war continued not in steel and fire but in the hearts of men who must choose, again and again, what they are willing to die for. Behind him, the Iron Covenant retreated into the forest. Shahanshah's soldiers vanished among the trees. The wounded groaned and prayed. The dead lay still, their stories finished, their pages closed. And ahead, Jarkata Sahib's cavalry crested the final hill, their banners bright in the morning light, their horses steaming, their riders weary but fierce, and at their head rode a man whose face Orhan Sahib had not seen in months, a man whose arrival meant not the end of the war but the beginning of its next chapter. The sun climbed, the smoke thinned, the ridge stood. And Orhan Sahib, commander of men who had bled in the dark, lifted his face to the light and breathed. The road climbed as if it wished to pull their souls out of the valley and weigh them closer to the sky, and with each step the air thinned and sharpened, and the men's breath came out like smoke even under the noon sun. The forest loosened its grip slowly, tree by tree, until the world opened into rough highland where stone showed through the soil like bone through torn flesh. They marched in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because every word would have been a confession of exhaustion, and they would not confess weakness to the mountains. Orhan Sahib walked at the front with dust on his boots and dried blood on his sleeve. and he did not look back often, for he knew that when a commander looks back too much, the men begin to think the road behind is safer than the road ahead. Tarhan stayed close as a shadow that had sworn an oath. Faladios moved behind them with his wound bound tight, the cloth dark at the edges where life kept trying to leak away. Daimir Khan carried his axe on his shoulder as if it were a farmer's tool, and yet everyone knew it had become a judge's hammer. Abdul Rahman and Mahmud kept the column from stretching too thin, calling men forward, keeping the wounded from falling behind. Alauddin Sahib guarded the rear with a face like carved stone, eyes always turning to the tree line as if he expected the forest to cough up enemies one last time. And they dragged Yaqid. The rope bit his wrists and ankles, the gag muffled his breath, his feet stumbled, and when he fell they did not stop long, for mercy is a virtue but war does not wait. They lifted him like a sack and shoved him forward again. Sometimes his eyes rolled toward Orhan Sahib with hatred that still tried to wear the mask of pride. Sometimes, in the emptiest hours, fear slipped through that mask like water through cracked clay. On the second night of the march, the sky turned the color of old bruises and the wind rose, and with it came the first true taste of what Shahanshah could still do even after losing the creek. Scouts appeared on the ridges like black pins stuck into the earth, watching, counting, retreating when pursued. A hawk circled above longer than any hawk should, and Tarhan looked up once and said nothing, but his eyes narrowed in the way of a man who had learned that even Allah's creatures can be used by men with poison in their hearts. As the night deepened, Kilal returned again, breathless, cloak wet with mist. "Sahib," he whispered, "riders many, not yet close but coming." Orhan Sahib did not ask how many, because numbers in the dark are often lies. He asked only what mattered: how soon? Before dawn, Kilal said. Orhan Sahib nodded once as if he had been expecting fate to keep pace with them. "Then we do not sleep," he answered, and his voice was calm, and calmness in such moments is not softness but iron. "We reach the ridge before light, or we fight on open ground while they are fresh and we are broken." He turned to Tarhan, "Take 20, walk wide. If they try to cut the column, you will cut their attempt." Tarhan's reply was a vow, "By Allah." He turned to Daimir Khan, "You and Abdul Rahman will keep the center tight. If the enemy comes, the wounded stay inside the shield ring. We will not let Shahanshah harvest our weak as trophies." Daimir Khan spat into the dust, "Let him come." The column moved through the night like a slow river of steel. Men stumbled, caught themselves, marched on with lips cracked and eyes burning. Somewhere in the blackness, wolves called, and the sound did not frighten them. It felt like kinship. Then, near the hour when the stars began to fade, arrows came again, not in a storm like the forest, but in sharp, probing shots. One struck a mule. The animal screamed and collapsed, thrashing. Another arrow buried itself in a shield and vibrated like an angry insect. Orhan Sahib lifted his hand and the column tightened, shields raising, pikes angling outward. And then the riders appeared, silhouettes against the paling edge of the sky, fast, wide, trying to herd them, trying to push them off the narrow track into rocky gullies where horses could not move and men could be slaughtered in confusion. Tarhan's men struck first from the flank, emerging from the darkness with a shout that ripped the morning's quiet. Tarhan moved like a wrathful prayer, his sword flashing, his shield smashing into a rider's knee, sending horse and man tumbling. Tamir Boga's spear took a horse in the chest, and the animal folded, throwing its rider hard into stone. But these were not peasants. They were Shahanshah's light cavalry, trained to sting and retreat, trained to waste time and blood without committing. They circled, losing arrows, slipping away when charged, returning again like flies to a wound. Orhan Sahib watched their pattern and did not chase. He lifted his chin toward Mahmud. "Signal Alauddin Sahib," he said. "Rear guard will not simply defend. When they swing wide, we strike at their horses, not their men. A man without a horse becomes a burden." Mahmud ran the command back, and soon the rear guard changed like a hinge turning. When the riders came again, thinking the back of the column weak, Alauddin Sahib's men stepped out, not chasing but thrusting pikes low. A horse screamed and toppled, legs breaking. Another stumbled as a pike tore its tendon, and its rider flew, rolling, shouting curses. The riders faltered for the first time, surprised by discipline instead of panic. Orhan Sahib seized that hesitation. "Forward," he commanded. "Do not stop for their noise. Every step we take is a wall between us and their hunger." And so they marched through the harassment, bleeding in small cuts rather than one fatal wound, until at last the land rose sharply and Kara Ridge revealed itself fully. It was not a palace, it was not a city. It was a ruin of old stone, a fortress built by forgotten hands, perched like a clenched fist above the surrounding valleys. Its walls were broken in places, its towers half-collapsed, but its bones remained strong. It had height, it had view, it had a well if Allah was merciful and the old maps were true. Orhan Sahib stopped at the edge of the ridge and looked up. The morning light touched the stone and made it look pale and ancient, like the skull of some giant beast. He whispered Bismillah, and then his voice rose. "This is where we will make Shahanshah pay." They climbed. By midday the men were inside the old fortress, clearing rubble, dragging stones, raising makeshift barricades with wood cut from the sparse trees. Abdul Rahman organized the pike lines at the weak points. Damir Khan took men to reinforce the gate opening with timber and iron scavenged from broken hinges. Altuddin Sahib sent Zarkin and Kulads to find the well. When the first bucket rose, dripping cold water, the men gathered as if witnessing a miracle. Some wept silently, some kissed the rim of the bucket. War teaches men that water is not just water, it is life, it is mercy, it is a sign that Allah has not turned his face away. Orhan Sahib did not drink first. He watched the wounded drink, watched the youngest drink, watched the men who had marched without complaint drink. Only after that did he take a mouthful, and the coldness struck his teeth like truth. Then he began the true work, war beyond battle. He sent Khalil and Mustafa with scouts down the slopes to watch for Shahanshah's approach. He sent Tamir Boga with a small force to the eastern track to cut it, to roll stones down if wagons tried to climb, to turn the path into a throat filled with knives. He ordered Mahmud to count arrows, count grain, count salt, and he listened as if he were listening to the recitation of a judge listing charges. "How long?" Orhan Sahib asked. Mahmud swallowed. "If we ration 12 days. Orhan Sahib nodded. "Then we must make Shahanshah bleed time. Time is food when food is scarce." He turned to Faladios. "Your men." Faladios answered, "Scattered but near. Some will come when they see our smoke." Orhan Sahib looked toward the horizon. "Send word, tell them Kara Ridge stands. Tell them if they have ever sworn loyalty to a cause bigger than their bellies, this is the hour to prove it." Faladios nodded once and left, moving with the impatience of a man who hated waiting almost as much as he hated traitors. Yaqid was dragged into a small stone chamber near the inner wall, bound to a pillar. The air inside smelled of damp and old ash. Orhan Sahib entered alone, carrying no torch at first, letting the darkness press itself against them both. Yaqid's voice came muffled, bitter. "So you hide in ruins like a rat." Orhan Sahib struck flint and lit a small lamp. The flame showed Yaqid's swollen cheek, his bruised mouth, his eyes still sharp with defiance. "Rats hide," Orhan Sahib said. "I stand, there is a difference." Yaqid spat blood. "You stand because you have no choice." Orhan Sahib stepped closer until the lamp lit his face fully, revealing the exhaustion in his eyes and the unbroken line of his will. "Every man has choice," he said softly. "Even now you have choice, you can speak truth." Yaqid laughed and it sounded like a cough. "Truth, the truth is Shahanshah will surround you, he will starve you, he will hang your captains and scatter your men, and you will be remembered as a stubborn fool." Orhan Sahib's gaze did not waver. "And you will be remembered as what?" Yaqid's smile faltered for the first time. Orhan Sahib leaned in. "You wanted to live for silver. Look at yourself, bound in filth, no silver in your mouth, no sanctuary, only the stench of your own choices." Yaqid's eyes flicked away. Orhan Sahib's voice became a blade wrapped in velvet. "Tell me what Shahanshah has planned. Tell me which road he will take. Tell me which captains he has bribed. Speak, and perhaps your death will be clean." Yaqid's nostrils flared. "You cannot offer me anything." Orhan Sahib straightened. "Then I offer you nothing," he said, and his tone turned colder. "I ask you one last time, not for my sake, but for your soul. Repent. Do not meet Allah with a tongue that still lies." Yaqid's jaw clenched. "My soul is my own." Orhan Sahib extinguished the lamp with his fingers, the flame dying with a hiss. In the sudden darkness, his voice was the voice of history, unforgiving. "Then keep it," he said, and he left Yaqid in blackness with his own breath and his own fear. That evening, as the sun sank and the shadows returned like soldiers marching back into their posts, the first dust clouds appeared in the valley below. Scouts rode in pairs, then in lines, then in a thickening mass. Torches began to flicker as darkness spread, and in the center of that moving sea a larger banner rose, Shahanshah's sign, proud and furious, waving as if it could whip the world into obedience. The fortress grew quiet, men stopped their work and went to their positions. Shields were lifted, arrows were knocked, pikes lowered, the well bucket was pulled up and covered as if protecting a child. Orhan Sahib walked along the wall with Turhan at his side. "He comes quickly," Turhan said. Orhan Sahib's eyes tracked the enemy's advance. Because he cannot afford patience, every day he spends here, his own lands question him. Below, Shahanshah's army began to spread, forming a ring. Tents rose like fungi, fires lit. Lines of wagons appeared, carrying siege tools and supplies, and among them Orhan Sahib saw shapes that made his stomach tighten. Tall frames of wood, disassembled, carried in pieces. Siege engines. Shahanshah was not coming merely to surround, he was coming to break stone. Daimir Khan joined them, breathing hard from climbing. "Sahib," he said, "they are too many." Orhan Sahib nodded slowly. "Then we must make them feel few." He turned to Abdul Rahman. "No arrows wasted, no shouting, let them hear only silence from us. Silence frightens more than noise." Abdul Rahman bowed. "As you command." And so the first night of siege began with strange restraint. Shahanshah's men shouted insults, beat drums, raised torches, sang songs meant to mock faith and provoke rage. They wanted Orhan Sahib's men to loose arrows in anger, to expose themselves on the walls, to bleed their supplies. But the fortress answered with quiet. Only the wind spoke, only the crackle of enemy fires below, only the occasional soft murmur of La ilaha illallah from a man gripping his spear as if it were the last solid thing in a world turning to smoke. Near midnight, Shahanshah's herald rode forward under a white cloth, stopping at bowshot. He lifted his voice. "Orhan Sahib, Shahanshah offers pardon to those who abandon you. Come down, lay your arms, and you may return to your homes. But if you remain, you will die of hunger, and your wives will be taken as slaves, and your children will beg in streets." The words crawled up the stone like poison. Men tightened, some flinched. One young soldier near Mahmud swallowed hard, eyes shining with fear. Orhan Sahib stepped to the wall's edge so the torchlight below could see him. His voice carried, not shouted, but clear. "Tell Shahanshah," he said, "that men who threaten women and children have already declared their own cowardice. We do not bargain with cowards, we bury them." The herald's voice sharpened. "Return Yaqid, who is under Shahanshah's protection." Orhan Sahib's answer was immediate. "Yaqid is under Allah's judgment." The herald spat into the dust and rode away. Then the siege truly began. At dawn the first stones came. They did not fly yet from engines. They were rolled down toward the walls by men testing range, testing slopes, testing weaknesses. Archers began their work, sending arrows upward in steady rain whenever a head appeared above the battlements. One arrow struck a man beside Mustafa and pinned his hand to the wood, and the man screamed until Turhan yanked the shaft free and wrapped the wound with cloth while whispering prayers that sounded like command. Orhan Sahib watched it all with eyes that did not blink often. He was measuring. He was counting enemy rhythms. He was reading Shahanshah's mind in the way a hunter reads paw prints. After that, as the morning climbed, Shahanshah's siege engines began to assemble. Great wooden arms, ropes thick as wrists, baskets for stones, frames braced with iron. Men worked under shouted orders, and Shahanshah himself rode through them on a dark horse, visible now, a figure draped in authority, surrounded by guards, moving as if he owned even the air. Shahanshah looked up at Karo Ridge and raised his arm. A chant rose from his soldiers, a roar meant to shake courage loose from the stone. Orhan Sahib did not flinch. He turned to Turhan and spoke low. "Tonight we strike." Turhan's eyes narrowed. "A sortie." Orhan Sahib nodded. "We cannot sit and let those engines speak. We will silence them with fire." Turhan's voice was grim. "We have little oil." Orhan Sahib's gaze hardened. "Then we use theirs." That night, when the enemy's campfires burned low and the guards grew tired and the siege lines relaxed into complacency, Orhan Sahib chose his men carefully. Turhan would lead. Faladios would come, despite his wound, because some men are more dangerous when they bleed. Tamir, Boga, and Mustafa would take the left edge of the raid, cutting ropes and throats alike. Zarkin and Kuleds would carry torches wrapped in cloth to keep flames hidden until the moment. Daimir Khan would remain to hold the walls, for a fortress without its spine collapses. Before they left, Orhan Sahib gathered them in the shadow of the broken tower. He did not speak of glory, he spoke of necessity, which is the purest truth in war. "We go down," he said, "like knives in the night. We do not seek battle, we seek silence. We burn what must burn and we return. If you are surrounded, you do not die screaming. You die making the enemy pay for the space your brothers need to breathe. Orhan placed his hand on his chest. By Allah. Faladios's voice was rough. By oath. They climbed down the rear slope where the stone was jagged and dangerous, moving like thieves who stole not gold but the enemy's future. The night was cold. The valley below glowed faintly with scattered fires. The enemy camp smelled of sweat, dung, and cooked meat, rich food that made Orhan Sahib's jaw tighten not from hunger alone but from insult. Shahanshah ate well while he threatened to starve others. They moved closer, crawling through scrub and rock. Guards walked their rounds, torches bobbing, boots crunching on gravel. The siege engines stood like sleeping beasts, their wooden frames towering, their ropes taut, their baskets waiting to hurl stone into men. Orhan waited until a guard passed, then surged forward, silent as breath. His hand clamped over the man's mouth. His blade slid in beneath the ribs. The guard's eyes widened, then emptied. Orhan lowered him gently to the ground as if laying a child to sleep. Faladios signaled with 2 fingers. Tamir Boga and Mustafa slipped left. Zarkin and Kuludz moved toward the nearest engine, torches ready. Orhan Sahib watched, heart steady. This was the war beneath the war, the part not sung by poets, the part made of dirt under fingernails and blood wiped onto sleeves. Then, as they reached the first engine, a sudden voice cut through the night. "Stop!" It came from behind the engine's shadow, calm and cold. A guard captain stepped out, not surprised, not panicked, waiting. He held no torch. His eyes gleamed with knowing. "A trap." Orhan Sahib's blood chilled. Shahanshah had anticipated a raid. He had left bait. The captain lifted his hand, and from behind tents and wagons, archers rose, bows drawn, aimed not at the walls but at the raiders. Spears appeared. Men stepped from darkness like wolves from tall grass. Orhan reacted instantly, stepping in front of Orhan Sahib, shield raised, though there was no time for full cover. The captain smiled. "Orhan Sahib," he said softly, as if greeting a guest. "Shahanshah sends his regards." And then the enemy loosed. Arrows hissed in a tight volley. One struck Kuludz in the throat, cutting his breath off like a snuffed candle. Another hit Zarkin in the shoulder, spinning him. A third slammed into Orhan's shield and split, but the impact drove Orhan backward a step. Orhan Sahib shouted, "Fire!" Not the torch fire, the plan, the turning point. Zarkin, wounded, snarled and flung his wrapped torch into the engine's rope bundle. The cloth caught, flame licking fast along oil-soaked fibers. Another torch flew, then another. Within heartbeats, the siege engine began to burn, the ropes snapping with sharp twangs, the wooden frame catching like dry bone. The enemy surged forward, trying to smother the flames, trying to seize the raiders. Orhan led the countercharge because that was what he was made for. He slammed into the first spear line, shield first, knocking a man down, then slicing across another's face. Faladios fought at his side, blade flashing, carving a path toward the second engine. Tamir Boga's shout rose from the left, and Orhan Sahib knew the left flank had engaged. Mustafa's voice answered, and then screams, close, sharp, intimate. This was no grand battlefield, it was a butcher's room under open sky. Orhan Sahib moved with his sword tight and short, striking wrists that held spears, stabbing into the gaps beneath armor. He did not waste motion. He did not chase. He killed what was in his path and stepped over it. The guard captain lunged at him, and their blades met. The captain was skilled, too skilled for a mere guard. His strikes were precise, aiming for tendons, for throat, for the places where command ends in a single heartbeat. Orhan Sahib parried and felt the shock travel up his arm. The captain pressed again, and Orhan Sahib stepped aside, letting the blade pass, then answered with a thrust that the captain barely deflected. The captain's eyes narrowed. "You should have stayed on your wall," he hissed. Orhan Sahib's voice was cold. "And you should have stayed loyal to your own soul." They fought in the shadow of burning wood. Sparks rained down, smoke thickened. The light of flame made their faces look carved from copper and ash. Then the captain fainted low and slashed high. Orhan Sahib raised his blade but felt the edge catch his forearm, slicing through cloth and skin. Pain flared, hot and bright. The captain smiled, thinking he had opened the kill. But Orhan Sahib used the pain like a spur. He stepped inside the captain's range, shoulder to chest, and drove his pommel into the man's jaw. Bone cracked. The captain staggered. Orhan Sahib's blade followed, a short, brutal cut across the captain's throat. The man's hands flew up, trying to hold in his own life, and then he fell, nailing, then collapsing into the dirt as blood soaked the ground. Tarhan grabbed Orhan Sahib's arm. "Sahib, more coming." Orhan Sahib looked up and saw it, Shahanshah's camp awakening fully, men pouring from tents, horns sounding, torches flaring. They had burned one engine, perhaps two, but to remain would be death. Back, Orhan Sahib commanded, "to the ridge." They withdrew under arrow fire, dragging the wounded. Zarkin stumbled but kept moving, teeth clenched. Faladios took an arrow in his cloak and tore it free as if tearing away an insult. Tarhan carried Kuladz's body for 3 steps, then set it down gently, because even the strongest man cannot carry the dead and save the living at the same time. The engines burned behind them, roaring, collapsing, sending up a column of smoke that would be seen from the ridge like a dark victory. They climbed back up the jagged stones as the enemy pursued, but the slope favored defenders, and Abdul Rahman's archers on the wall began to loose downward, cutting the pursuit short. Men fell on the rocks, tumbling, breaking, dying. At last the raiders reached the fortress, breath ragged, bodies bleeding, eyes fierce. Daimir Khan met them at the gate opening. "You did it," he said, voice rough with relief. Orhan Sahib nodded once. "We did enough." He looked at the burning camp below, at the smoke twisting into the dawn. Shahanshah's plan had been wounded, not killed, wounded. But war is often won by wounds that never heal. By midday, Shahanshah's anger became visible. He rode near the base of the ridge and ordered his archers to shoot not merely at walls but at any place where a man might draw breath. He ordered his men to drag forward captives, villagers caught in surrounding lands, and he had them kneel where they could be seen from the fortress. A murmur of horror spread through Orhan Sahib's men. Daimir Khan's knuckles whitened around his axe. Mahmud's eyes widened and his lips moved in prayer. Shahanshah lifted his hand. The first captive was executed with a single stroke, his head rolling into the dust. Orhan Sahib's stomach tightened, but his face did not change. This was the moral war, the war for the soul, the war where rulers reveal what they truly are. Tarhan's voice trembled with fury. "Sahib, let us charge, let us break his camp and cut him down." Orhan Sahib's reply was quiet, and that quiet was more terrible than shouting. "He wants that," he said. "He wants us to leap from our walls like angry boys. He wants us to die in open ground while he sits above it and calls it victory." Another captive died, another. Men on the wall began to shake. Some wept openly now, their faith colliding with helplessness. Orhan Sahib turned to his men and spoke with a force that seemed to steady even the stones beneath their feet. "Look," he said, "look well, this is Shahanshah's kingdom, this is his mercy. This is the coin he pays with innocent blood. Do not let him buy your minds." He raised his voice toward the valley so Shahanshah's men could hear. "Shahanshah," he called, "you slaughter the weak because you cannot break the strong. You call yourself ruler, but you rule only by terror. Allah will weigh you." Shahanshah, far below, looked up, and even from distance Orhan Sahib could feel the hatred in his gaze like heat from a furnace. That night, as the fortress settled into grim routine, watch shifts, rationed bread, water measured like treasure, Faladios came to Orhan Sahib with eyes sharp and tired. "Sahib," he said, "we have a problem inside." Orhan Sahib did not ask what kind, because inside problems are always the most dangerous. "Speak." Faladios lowered his voice. "Zarkin, he has been talking to men at night, quietly. He says we cannot hold. He says Shahanshah's pardon might save families. He says perhaps Yaqid's protection was not foolish." Orhan Sahib's expression did not change, but something in his eyes cooled further, like water turning to ice. "Bring Zarkin," he said. Faladios hesitated. "If you confront him openly, it may split men." Orhan Sahib's voice was steady. "If I do not confront poison, it becomes blood." They brought Zarkin to the inner yard near the well. The man's shoulder wound had been bound, but his eyes were restless, avoiding Orhan Sahib's gaze. Men gathered in small groups, pretending not to listen, but every ear was turned. Orhan Sahib spoke to Zarkin softly, so softly that the men had to lean in, and that leaning made them part of the judgment. "Zarkin," Orhan Sahib said, "I am told you speak of surrender." Zarkin swallowed. "Sahib, I speak of survival." Orhan Sahib nodded slowly. "Survival is a good word," he said, "but it is not always a good god." Zarkin's voice grew defensive. We are hungry, we are outnumbered. Shahansha kills captives before our eyes if we give him yakid if we accept terms. Orhan Sahib cut him off not with volume but with truth. Terms from a man who slaughters kneeling prisoners, he said. What do you think his terms are worth? He will take our weapons, then our sons, then our daughters, then our faith. He will promise you life and give you a long death. Zarkin's eyes flicked around, seeking allies. Some men agree with me. Orhan Sahib's gaze hardened. Then let them stand and say it. Silence. Not because all disagreed, but because fear, when dragged into daylight, often dies or becomes ashamed. Orhan Sahib stepped closer to Zarkin. You were wounded in the raid, he said. You bled with us. That gives you the right to speak, but it does not give you the right to rot the hearts of men who still stand. Zarkin's jaw clenched. I will not watch us starve for pride. Orhan Sahib's voice became heavy, like a door closing. This is not pride, he said. This is duty, and duty is what separates men from beasts. He turned to Abdul Rahman. Zarkin will be confined, not executed, not beaten. Confined, let him sit with his fear where it cannot infect others. If he repents, Allah sees. If he does not, time will judge. Zarkin's face twisted with humiliation and anger, but guards led him away. Tarhan exhaled slowly, and Orhan Sahib heard the relief beneath it. Not relief that a man was punished, but relief that the line between loyalty and surrender had been drawn clearly. Then, near the hour before dawn, a scream ripped through the fortress. Not from the wall. From inside. Orhan Sahib sprang up, sword in hand, Tarhan already moving beside him. They ran toward the sound, passing sleeping men jolting awake, passing the well where a bucket swayed on its rope as if the stone itself had been startled. They reached the chamber where Yakid was held. The guards lay on the ground, throats cut. The rope at Yakid's pillar hung loose, frayed. And Yakid traitor serpent poison tongue was gone. For a heartbeat the world tilted. Tarhan swore under his breath, a rare crack in his discipline. He had help. Orhan Sahib's eyes scanned the dark corners, the cut ropes, the precision of the kills. Not help, Orhan Sahib said quietly. A plan. Palladios arrived face hard. How? Orhan Sahib stepped into the chamber and knelt by one guard's body, touching the wound. Clean cut, sharp blade, no struggle. He stood slowly, the answer forming like thunder behind clouds. Someone gave him a knife, he said. Someone opened the door, someone guided him through the inner paths. Tarhan's voice was a growl. Zarkin. Orhan Sahib did not answer immediately. He looked out through the chamber's broken slit of a window toward the valley below. In the darkness, a small torch moved along the slope, too low, too careful, signaling. Then another torch answered from below. A betrayal signal. Orhan Sahib's face became stone. Seal the inner gate, he commanded. Wake every man, no one leaves his post. Damir Khan to the walls, Abdul Rahman to the eastern breach. Mahmud, find Zarkin. If his cell is empty, we have our proof. Men scattered, the fortress transforming from sleepy tension to immediate war. Horns sounded inside the walls, short and urgent. Footsteps pounded on stone. Shields clattered into place. Then from below, Shahansha's drums began again, faster now, eager. And in the half-light of approaching dawn, Orhan Sahib saw a figure running down the slope toward Shahansha's camp, moving like a man fleeing judgment. Yakid. He had escaped the noose of consequence once more, not by strength but by betrayal inside the fortress. Tarhan's knuckles whitened on his sword. Sahib, he said, voice tight, let me go, let me take 10 and cut him down before he reaches them. Orhan Sahib's eyes burned as he watched Yakid vanish into the enemy's outer fires. He wanted to roar. He wanted to throw himself off the wall and chase the traitor with his own hands. But command is a chain that holds a man back from his own hunger. He turned to Tarhan, voice low and deadly. If you leave the wall now, Shahansha will strike the moment he sees our line thin, he said. He will not merely rescue Yakid, he will take the fortress. Tarhan's chest heaved, anger fighting obedience. Orhan Sahib placed a hand on Tarhan's shoulder, firm. There will be a moment, he said. Allah will give us a moment, and when that moment comes, you will have your hunt. Below, Shahansha's camp erupted in new shouting, new confidence, as if the return of one traitor had become a prophecy of victory. Torches multiplied. Siege crews moved with fresh energy. the ring tightened. And then Shahanshah's herald rode forward again, voice gleaming with triumph. "Orhan Sahib," he cried, "your prisoner returns to his protector. Your walls cannot hold loyalty. Soon your captains will follow." Orhan Sahib stood on the battlement and stared down into the valley where smoke curled and banners fluttered. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried like an oath carved into stone. "Shahanshah," he said, "you have stolen a traitor back into your arms. Hold him close. He will bite you next." The wind shifted, bringing the smell of fresh-cut wood from below. Shahanshah's men were building something larger than engines now. Taller frames were rising, lashed together with rope and iron, rolling logs into place. A siege tower. Higher than the broken wall sections, high enough to vomit soldiers onto the battlements like an army climbing out of the mouth of hell. Orhan Sahib's gaze narrowed, calculating distances, counting hours, feeling the fortress's weaknesses like old scars. Tarhan leaned close. "Sahib," he whispered, "if that tower reaches our wall." Orhan Sahib's answer was a low, fierce prayer. "Then we will meet it with fire," he said, "and if fire is not enough, we will meet it with our bodies." He turned, calling his captains into motion. Damir Khan, prepare stones and boiling water. Abdul Rahman, double the archers on the north face. Mahmud, ration the grain again, tighten it. Faladios, find me men willing to climb down tonight and burn that tower before it moves. Faladios' eyes flashed. "I will go." Orhan Sahib caught his gaze. "Not alone." Faladios nodded once, "Then choose." Orhan Sahib looked across the wall at his tired men, men with bandaged arms and haunted eyes, men who had already fought a forest and a creek and a mercenary legion and now faced a siege tower rising like a curse. He chose because that is what commanders do. They choose who will live and who will likely die, and they carry the sin of that choice even when it is necessary. "Tarhan," Orhan Sahib said. Tarhan's eyes hardened. "Yes." Orhan Sahib's voice lowered. "Tonight," he said, "you will have your moment. You will not chase Yaqid into the camp like a lion into a trap. You will hunt him as Allah hunts the arrogant, quietly, precisely when he thinks himself safe." Tarhan's jaw clenched. "By Allah, I will bring you his fear." Orhan Sahib looked back down at the valley where Shahanshah's siege tower continued to grow, where drums beat faster, where the ring tightened, where the traitor had returned to whisper poison into a ruler's ear. The sun crept above the horizon, cold and pale, and its light fell on Kara Ridge like a judge's gaze. The fortress cast a long shadow over the valley, and in that shadow, Shahanshah's army moved like ants around a carcass, patient and merciless. Orhan Sahib lifted his sword slightly, feeling its weight, feeling the weight of all the vows behind it. And as the day brightened, the siege tower's first wheels were fitted, and the drums below began to beat in a rhythm that promised movement. That night would decide whether Kara Ridge became a fortress of legend or a tomb of stubborn men. And somewhere below, behind Shahanshah's banners, Yaqid breathed freely again, free enough to betray once more, free enough to point at hidden paths and weak stones, free enough to prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is not an engine of wood, but a man who has already sold his soul and now sells everyone else. The wind carried up a final sound before the day settled fully into war. Shahanshah's laughter, distant but clear, as if he believed the ridge was already his. Orhan Sahib did not answer with laughter. He answered with preparation. And in the tightening circle of stone and hunger and approaching fire, the next betrayal was already walking toward the gate. Night came as a lid of iron laid upon the world, and the wind moved through the pines like a blade being drawn, slow and warning, slow and sure. No moon showed her face. The stars themselves seemed to tighten like fists. In that darkness, men did not speak loudly, for every breath felt like it might betray them to the forest. And yet in that darkness, Orhan Sahib rode at the front as if he had known this road in another life, as if the shadows parted for him out of fear or out of decree. He did not wear the night like a cloak, he carried it like a burden. He carried the weight of oath and blood and the bitter taste of betrayal that would not leave his tongue. "In the name of Allah the Most High," he murmured, and the words were not for comfort, they were for judgment. Behind him rode Tarhan, his right hand, his sword hand, his shield when the world became a storm of arrows. Tarhan's eyes were not restless. They were fixed, like a hawk's gaze pinned to the throat of a hare. Where Orhan Sahib carried the law of the camp and the authority of the banner, Tarhan carried the violence that preserved it. Damir Khan rode close, his beard wet with night mist, listening more than speaking. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman moved on the flanks, keeping the line silent, keeping the horses from snorting too loud. Tamir Boga whispered to Mustafa, and Mustafa nodded once, the nod of a man who had already accepted that he might not see dawn. Alauddin Sahib rode further back with Zarkin and Kuleds, guarding the supply mules whose small bells had been wrapped with cloth. Even the metal had been taught silence. Ahead, black tree trunks rose like the pillars of an ancient ruin. The forest was not merely forest, it was a mouth, and they were entering it. Orhan Sahib raised his hand and the column slowed, then stopped. The men did not clatter, they did not argue, their discipline was the only light in that dark. He leaned toward Damir Khan. He will choose this place. Damir Khan answered in a low breath, Yaqid. The name fell into the night like a stone into a well, a traitor's name, a name that had once sat near the fire with them, sharing bread and salt, speaking of faith and brotherhood. Now it tasted like ash. Orhan Sahib's jaw tightened. He knows our roads, he knows our habits, he knows where a man's head turns when he is tired. Tarhan's voice came like steel sliding in a sheath. Then he knows where his own neck rests. Orhan Sahib did not smile. There was no joy left in such words, only necessity. Patience, he said. The beast reveals his path by the tracks of fear. We will not chase him like dogs. We will let him run into the net. He turned his head slightly, and in the half-seen darkness his eyes were two embers. Mahmud. Mahmud leaned in, eager, grim. Sahib. Send Killil with 10 men through the trees, Orhan Sahib ordered. Not to fight, to listen, to watch for broken branches, for the whisper of boots, for the breath of men who hide too close. If Allah wills, we will hear the ambush before it springs. Mahmud vanished back like a shadow given purpose. Orhan Sahib looked to Abdul Rahman. You will take the left, keep wide, and do not allow the enemy to slip behind us. If you see fireflies, if you smell oil, if you hear a bird cry at the wrong hour, you will know it is not the forest speaking. Abdul Rahman bowed his head. By my faith. Orhan Sahib looked to Tarhan. You will stay near me. Tarhan's answer was plain, until the soul leaves the body. They moved again, slow as the hand of fate. The horses' hooves sank into pine needles, muffled, patient. In such a march, a man could hear his own blood. Then, as the night deepened, a sound came, not loud but wrong. A twig snapped twice, quickly, as if stepped on and then stepped back from. Orhan Sahib raised his fist again. The line froze. Somewhere ahead an owl called. It called again. And then, too late, the same call came from the other side of the road, too perfect, too measured, like a man imitating Allah's creature. Orhan Sahib's voice was a blade. Shields. Men slid off their horses and crouched, their round shields lifting like a wall. The forest held its breath. And then the first arrow came, cutting the dark with a hiss, striking a shield with a hard, dead sound. Then the second. Then the sky itself seemed to spit. A storm of arrows fell not from one side but from both, crossing like the teeth of a trap. One man cried out as would split an iron found the soft part of his neck. Another fell from his horse, gurgling, hands clawing at the shaft as if he could pull death back out. Tarhan moved like an oath fulfilled. He stepped in front of Orhan Sahib and his shield rose and arrows struck it in a tight cluster, thudding, biting, trembling. One arrow slipped low toward Orhan Sahib's ribs and Tarhan's sword snapped out, swatting it aside with a metallic ring that sounded impossibly bright in the dark. Orhan Sahib's voice did not shake. Do not loose yet, wait. Damir Khan hissed, they want us to panic. Orhan Sahib's eyes tracked the direction of the volleys. They want us to break our formation. They want us to chase shadows and die in thickets. Another volley came and another, and the men held, crouched, breathing through their teeth. A few arrows found gaps. A captain behind cried, Alauddin Sahib, and the name carried the fear of loss. But Alauddin Sahib's voice answered from the rear, rough and alive. I still breathe, keep the line. Orhan Sahib listened between the arrows. Between every hiss and thud there was something else, movement, boots on leaf litter, men shifting position to close in. He leaned toward Tarhan. Now. Tarhan shouted low and fierce, charge the near trees. Orhan Sahib roared, Allahu Akbar. The men surged forward with a sound like a beast breaking chains. They did not run blindly. They ran in wedges, shields up, swords ready, and the distance to the tree line vanished. The enemy archers, hidden behind trunks and brush, had not expected the charge so soon. They had expected fear. They had expected a stall, a retreat, a confusion. Instead, they met steel. In the first clash, a man in dark cloth tried to draw a dagger, and Tarhan's sword took his wrist clean. The hand fell into leaves like a dropped fruit. The man screamed, and Tarhan's shield smashed into his mouth, silencing him with broken teeth. Orhan Sahib pushed through the brush, his own blade tight in his grip. The air smelled of sap, sweat, and arrow fletching. A foe lunged from behind a trunk. Orhan Sahib stepped aside and drove his sword into the man's side, feeling the sudden give, the wet resistance, the hot breath against his knuckles. He pulled free, and the man collapsed, wheezing like a bellows that had torn. Damir Khan fought near him, his axe biting into a shoulder, then into a neck. Abdul Rahman's men held the left, forming a half-circle to prevent encirclement. Mahmud's voice rose somewhere, calling men by name, keeping them from drifting apart in the dark. Then the enemy's second trap revealed itself. From deeper in the woods came a grinding sound, a cart, a dragged log, and suddenly fire blossomed. Not a campfire, not a torch. A wall of flame, fed by oil, rolled toward them as if the forest had decided to burn them out. It crawled along the ground, licking pine needles and dry brush, racing on a line that had been prepared. Smoke surged up, thick and choking, turning the world into a furnace of shadows. Men coughed, horses screamed, rearing eyes wild. Orhan Sahib covered his mouth with cloth, his eyes stung. Through the smoke he saw figures moving, enemy soldiers using the fire as cover to slip away, to relocate, to draw the fight into confusion. Shahanshah's hand, though distant, was in this. This was not a common bandit's cunning. This was a ruler's desperation, a ruler's coin spent on planners of death. Orhan Sahib shouted back to the road, "Do not scatter, Tamir Boga, take men and cut through the fire line, smother it with earth. Use cloaks, use sand, use your hands if you must. If the fire surrounds us, we die here like trapped wolves." Tamir Boga's answer was raw, "By Allah, we will not be roasted like swine." They fought the flame as they fought men, beating it down, smothering it, coughing, eyes streaming. Kulads and Zarkin dragged water skins forward, pouring what little they could onto the ground, turning dust to mud, mud to barrier. And in that choking chaos, a cry rose from the far right. "Yaqid's mark, I saw his mark." The word struck Orhan Sahib harder than any arrow. Yaqid had a way, he left signs, arrogant signs, as if he believed destiny itself served him. He wanted them to know he had been here. He wanted Orhan Sahib to taste the humiliation. Orhan Sahib turned, seeing through smoke a shape on a rise among the trees, a man standing too calmly to be a common soldier, his silhouette framed by flame like a demon painted on the night. Even from a distance, Orhan Sahib felt the insolence. Tarhan began to push forward. Orhan Sahib caught his arm, "Not yet." Tarhan's voice was a growl, "He will flee." "Let him," Orhan Sahib said. "A traitor runs toward his own end. We will decide where his feet land." Then from the rear, Mahmud returned with blood on his cheek. "Sahib," he panted. "Killil found tracks, fresh many. They have a second force beyond the creek. They mean to close the road behind us." Orhan Sahib's mind moved as quickly as swordplay. If the road behind was cut, retreat would become slaughter. If the fire reached their supplies, hunger would finish what arrows began. Shahanshah would not need victory in a field if he could bleed them in the wilderness. Orhan Sahib called Damir Khan and Abdul Rahman close, speaking into their ears as if sharing a prayer. "Damir Khan, take 40 and push ahead to the creek. Hold it, let no man cross behind us." Damir Khan's eyes were fierce. "If they want the creek, they will drink it red." Abdul Rahman, Orhan Sahib continued, "Take 20 to the rear, do not chase. Build a wall of shields and pikes on the road. If they come, make them pay for every step." Abdul Rahman bowed, "As you command." Then Orhan Sahib looked toward Alauddin Sahib. In the smoke, Alauddin Sahib approached, limping slightly, his shoulder bandaged with cloth already darkening. "You live," Orhan Sahib said. Alauddin Sahib's smile was thin. "Allah has not written my last page." Orhan Sahib's voice softened for the span of a heartbeat, then hardened again. "Guard the supplies. If the beasts slip in, we starve. If the mules die, we walk." Alauddin Sahib's face turned to stone. "None will touch them." Then, as the fire line dwindled, as earth choked it and the smoke thinned just enough for sight to return, the forest seemed to reveal the true battlefield. Bodies lay among roots, twisted, half-seen. Arrows jutted from trunks like black thorns. The air was sour with burnt resin and blood. And still somewhere ahead, Yakid moved like a serpent. Orhan Sahib did not pursue blindly. He ordered lanterns covered with cloth, a dim glow enough to see the ground without announcing their souls to the sky. They regrouped. They counted. Every name spoken was a wound. Every silence where a man should answer was a heavier wound. Mustafa stepped forward, his voice low. Sahib, the men whisper, they say Yakid is protected. They say Shahanshah has promised him sanctuary, has promised him gold and rank. Orhan Sahib's gaze cut through him, not in anger but in the sharpness of truth. Let them whisper. A whisper is only air until a man makes it action. He lifted his sword slightly, letting the dark metal catch the faintest light. Tell them this. Tell them a man may run to sanctuary, but he cannot run from Allah. Tell them Yakid's gold will turn to lead in his belly. Tell them the traitor will be judged in this world, so that the weak may learn that loyalty has a price and betrayal has a larger one. Mustafa bowed and withdrew. They moved again. The forest opened gradually into a rough clearing where the ground dipped toward a narrow creek. The water whispered, cold and uncaring. On the far side, faint torchlight flickered enemy positions. Damir Khan's men were already there, crouched behind rocks and fallen logs, holding the line. He raised a fist as Orhan Sahib approached, signaling control. Arrows occasionally hissed over the creek, but the fight had paused into a tense waiting as if both sides measured the other's will. Orhan Sahib knelt near Damir Khan. How many? More than bandits, Damir Khan said. They are soldiers, Shahanshah's coin, and I saw one of their captains, a man with a white sash, Faladios's rival, perhaps. At the mention of Faladios, something in Orhan Sahib's chest tightened. Orhan Faladios was not merely a commander, he was fire given flesh. He was a fierce blade that could defend a cause or burn it, depending on the hand that wielded him, and he hated Yakid with a hate that had matured into purpose. As if the night itself had heard their talk, a sound came from behind, a horse approaching at speed, then slowing, then stopping near the clearing's edge. Orhan Faladios stepped down from the saddle. He was tall, his armor marked by old cuts, his eyes alive with a controlled fury. His cloak smelled of smoke and distance. He walked to Orhan Sahib and bowed once, only once, for he bowed to no man twice. Orhan Sahib, he said, and his voice carried the weight of a man used to giving orders and watching them become graves. Orhan Sahib rose. Faladios. Faladios's gaze swept the clearing, the creek, the torchlight beyond. I came on the heels of rumor, he said. They said Yakid has sold roads to Shahanshah. They said he wears our language like a mask while his hands count foreign coin. Tarhan stepped closer, hand near sword. He set fire in the forest. Faladios's jaw flexed. Then he has chosen how he will die. Orhan Sahib studied him. Your hatred for Yakid is known, but hatred alone does not win wars. Faladios stepped nearer, lowering his voice as if speaking in a mosque. Then listen beyond hatred. Yakid does not merely betray, he instructs Shahanshah. He tells him where our wells are, where our winter stores are, where our captains sleep. He is a knife pressed to our throat by our own hand. Orhan Sahib's eyes narrowed. And you come to offer your own knife. I come to offer what I have, Faladios said. My men are near. They can cut the supply road to Shahanshah's forward camp. If their torches here are fed, it means they have oil and grain behind them. If we choke that, their courage dries like mud in sun. Orhan Sahib held silence for a moment, weighing. This was strategy, not rage. This was war seen as a living thing with veins. Good, Orhan Sahib said at last. We will not fight the creek only, we will strangle the hand that feeds it. A faint sound drifted from the other side, laughter, low, cruel. A voice called out in a language meant to taunt. Then, in the torchlight across the water, a figure stepped forward, raising a hand as if greeting old friends. Even from distance, the shape carried arrogance like a crown. Yakid. He stood where he could be seen but not easily reached. His guards formed a loose circle, bows half-drawn, spears planted. The creek between them seemed suddenly wider, deeper, like a boundary between honor and filth. Yakid called Orhan Sahib, commander of men who think themselves chosen. How heavy is your banner in this mud? Orhan Sahib's men bristled, some stepping forward, but Orhan Sahib lifted his hand. His voice carried across the water, calm enough to shame the night. Yakid, he called back, you speak loud because you stand behind other men's shields. Yakid laughed again, shields, I stand behind wisdom. Shahansha knows how to reward those who see the world as it is, not as poets dream. Come, cross the creek, let us speak like brothers. Faladios's hand tightened on his sword hilt. Tarhan's eyes burned. Orhan Sahib answered, brotherhood is not spoken by tongue, it is proven by blood and loyalty. You have sold both. You have sold the road our children would walk. Yakid spread his arms as if lamenting. A road is a road. It belongs to the one who can hold it. Your men die for prayers. Mine will live for silver. Orhan Sahib's voice turned colder than the creek. Silver buys food. It cannot buy a clean grave. Yakid leaned forward smiling, and his next words were sharpened. You preach justice, Orhan Sahib, yet you would take authority for yourself. You would wear command like a robe of holiness. Is it justice or hunger for rule? A murmur rippled behind Orhan Sahib. There it was, poison thrown with skill, psychological war, not merely to threaten bodies but to rot trust. Orhan Sahib turned his head slightly, speaking so his own men heard him before the enemy did. Hear him, he said. He accuses because he fears. A thief calls the honest man greedy so that his own hands seem less dirty. Then he faced Yakid again. Authority is not taken for pleasure. It is carried so that the weak may sleep. If I carry it, I will answer for it before Allah. Yakid's smile tightened. Then answer now. Send one man, let him cross and face me. If your cause is pure, let steel judge it. Faladios stepped forward instantly. I will cross. Tarhan moved as well. No, I will. Orhan Sahib raised his hand, stopping both with a single gesture that carried command like thunder. He looked at Faladios. This is your rival, he said softly, but it is also a trap. Faladios did not blink. All duels are traps, yet men still fight them because some stains cannot be washed except with blood. Orhan Sahib held his gaze. In Faladios's eyes there was no madness, only clarity. If Faladios fell, the men might see it as doom. If Faladios won, Yakid's myth would collapse like a tent cut at the ropes. Orhan Sahib turned his head to Tarhan. If arrows fly, you will cover him. Tarhan's answer was immediate, with my life. Orhan Sahib nodded once and stepped closer to the creek. Yakid, he called, you want steel to speak. Very well, Barhan Faladios will cross, but know this. If you break the duel with hidden men, if you lose arrows, if you stain even your own false honor further, I will not negotiate. I will burn your camps and salt your wells until Shahansha himself begs for water. Yakid spread his hands. As you wish, let the world witness. Faladios removed his cloak and handed it to Mustafa without looking. He stepped into the creek. Water swirled around his boots, then his shins. The current tugged like a living hand. He kept his sword high, his eyes fixed ahead. The torchlight made his armor gleam like a saint's relic and a murderer's tool all at once. Across the creek, Yakid stepped forward, drawing his blade slowly, theatrically. His face was smooth with confidence, and yet his eyes flicked once to the side, checking his men. Even in a duel, he could not stop counting advantage. Faladios reached the far bank, water dripping from him, and climbed with measured steps. He did not rush, he did not waste breath. The circle of guards widened, giving space, but their bows remained in hands. Their spears remained upright. Orhan Sahib watched from his bank, every muscle in him held tight. He did not pray with raised hands, he prayed with attention. Faladios spoke first, his voice low but audible. You were fed by our fire. Yakid smiled, and now I dine elsewhere. Faladios took one step. You swore by Allah. Yakid's smile sharpened. I swore by opportunity. Faladios's eyes hardened. Then you will die by consequence. They moved. Steel met steel with a sound that seemed too loud for night. The first exchange was testing. Slashes caught on guards, a thrust parried, a blade skimming armor with a scream of metal. Yakid was skilled, not merely a snake, and his footwork was quick, deceptive. He tried to draw Faladios offline, to make him overreach into the circle where a guard's spear might accidentally interfere. Faladios did not bite. He kept his stance centered, his shoulders relaxed, his blade disciplined. He attacked not with frenzy but with judgment, striking at wrists, at elbows, at the small openings where arrogance becomes death. Yakid feinted high and cut low, and Faladios pivoted, the blade kissing air, then answered with a thrust that forced Yakid to retreat 2 steps. Yakid's heel slipped on damp ground, and in that slip the mask cracked for a heartbeat, fear, quick and bright. From Orhan Saheb's side, Tarhan shifted, raising his shield slightly, as if already reading the future. Yakid's guard on the right lifted his bow a fraction. Orhan Saheb's voice snapped, carrying like a whip, "If you loose, you die." The guard froze. Shahanshah's coin had hired him, but it had not bought his courage against a commander's promise. The duel intensified. Faladios pressed forward, forcing Yakid toward a patch of brush and stones. Yakid tried to angle away, tried to circle, but Faladios cut off the path again and again, as if herding a wolf toward a pit. Yakid's breathing grew louder. His blade began to swing wider, driven by irritation. He attacked with a flurry meant to impress, meant to overwhelm. Faladios absorbed it with calm parries, each block a measured insult. Then Faladios struck not a killing blow, but a humiliating one. His blade snapped out and carved a line across Yakid's cheek. Blood appeared instantly, dark under torchlight, and ran down to the jaw. Yakid's eyes widened. The circle of guards murmured. His myth, his untouchable image, bled in front of them. Yakid hissed, "Dog." Faladios answered, "A dog guards loyalty. You guard only your hunger." Yakid roared and lunged, throwing everything into a single heavy strike. Faladios stepped inside it, shoulder turning, and his sword hilt smashed into Yakid's mouth. Teeth cracked. Yakid staggered backward, spitting blood. For a heartbeat, all became still. And in that stillness, a hidden archer further back, perhaps placed by Shahanshah himself, loosed an arrow toward Faladios's exposed side. The arrow flew like a judgment. Tarhan moved before thought could finish forming. He sprinted along the creek bank, shield rising, and at the exact moment the arrow would have found Faladios's ribs, Tarhan's shield caught it with a brutal thud. The arrow quivered, trapped in wood. Tarhan did not stop. He seized a spear from one of his men and hurled it across the creek with the strength of a man throwing his own rage. The spear vanished into the darkness beyond the torchlight, and a cry answered. Someone had been struck. Orhan Saheb's voice thundered. "They have broken the duel, archers loose." His men, who had held restraint like a painful virtue, now released it. Arrows flew across the creek in a black swarm, striking shields, striking flesh. The enemy guards scrambled, formation collapsing into panic. On the far bank, Faladios did not waste the moment. He surged forward and drove his sword into Yakid's shoulder, not deep enough to end him, but enough to cripple. Yakid screamed, falling to one knee. Faladios grabbed Yakid by the hair and yanked his head back, blade poised at the throat. Orhan Saheb's men shouted, some in triumph, some in fury. The creek was chaos, water splashing with wounded men falling in, torches dropping, steam rising where flame kissed wet ground. But then from deeper in the enemy lines, a horn sounded, low, long, dreadful. Not a signal of retreat. A signal of arrival. From the trees behind Yakid's position came the heavy stomp of organized feet. Torches multiplied, moving in rows. Shields caught the light like scales on a serpent. Shahanshah had not placed all his men at the creek. He had held a larger force in reserve. And now, as if to make the night itself confess, a tall banner rose behind those torches, Shahanshah's sign, carried forward with grim certainty. Orhan Saheb's blood cooled. This was the true design: lure them into a fight at the creek, provoke a duel, break it, ignite chaos, then strike with the reserve force while their attention was divided. Yakid, bleeding and half-kneeling, managed to laugh through broken teeth. "You see, Orhan Saheb," he rasped, voice carrying across water, "justice is a lovely word, but banners decide history." Faladios's blade hovered at Yakid's throat. He could end him, he could erase him. But around them, the battlefield shifted. The reserve force advanced, tightening, and in their movement was the promise of encirclement. Tarhan shouted, "Faladios back, they will cut you off." Faladios looked up, eyes meeting Orhan Saheb across the creek. In that look was a question without words. Do I finish this, or do I live to fight the war? Orhan Saheb's answer came like a decree. "Bring him," he commanded. "Do not grant him martyrdom by your hand alone. Drag him before the army. Let every man see the traitor's face." Faladios nodded once. He slammed the pommel into Yakid's temple, knocking him limp, then heaved him onto his shoulder like a sack of rotten grain. He turned toward the creek, stepping back as enemy arrows began to fall again, sharper now, more disciplined. Tarhan and 2 archers covered him, shields raised, arrows answering arrows. One shaft struck Tarhan's shield and split, the pieces skittering off into water. Orhan Sahib's mind raced, already seeing the next moves like lines on a map drawn in blood. If they held the creek, they could prevent the reserve force from fully crossing. If they fell back too far, the enemy would press into the forest again and use fire as weapon. If they advanced now, they might drown in numbers. Damir Khan, Orhan Sahib shouted, "Hold the creek, no crossing. Abdul Rahman, bring your rear wall forward. Lock shields, make a gate of iron." Men moved with desperate discipline. Damir Khan's axe rose and fell on any head that appeared near the water. Abdul Rahman's pikes bristled, turning the bank into a thorned ridge. Faladios waded back through the creek with Yakid slung over him, water churning at his knees. Enemy arrows slapped into the water around him, making small fountains that glittered in torchlight. One arrow struck Faladios' back plate and glanced off with a shriek. Tarhan stepped into the creek to meet him, shield high, body between Faladios and the next volley. "Give him," Tarhan grunted. Faladios' voice was strained. "He is heavier than his honor." Tarhan seized Yakid by the collar and dragged him up the bank, leaving muddy streaks like the trail of a carcass. Orhan Sahib looked down at Yakid's unconscious face, bloody, swollen, half-drowned in humiliation. For a heartbeat, Orhan Sahib felt not triumph but sorrow that a man who once prayed beside them had become a beast for coin. Then sorrow hardened into resolve. "Bind him," Orhan Sahib ordered, "and gag him. His tongue has murdered enough." Mustafa and Kulad's bound Yakid's wrists and ankles with rope, pulling tight until the cords bit flesh. Zarkin stuffed cloth into his mouth. Yakid's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then focused, and in them flared hatred. Orhan Sahib leaned down close enough that only Yakid would hear. "You wanted to accuse me of hunger for authority," he said softly. "Watch now how authority tastes. It tastes like restraint. It tastes like the decision not to kill you here because your death must serve justice, not anger." Yakid tried to speak through the gag, his face twisting. Orhan Sahib straightened. Across the creek, the reserve force formed a line, shields locked, archers behind. Their torches made the night look like a city of fire. And above them, that banner, Shahanshah's sign, waved slowly, arrogantly, as if the wind itself bowed to it. A voice carried across the water, amplified by the soldiers around it. Shahanshah did not step forward, but his herald did, calling in a voice trained to command attention. "Orhan Sahib," the herald shouted, "Shahanshah offers mercy. Lay down your arms. Return the traitor Yakid who is under Shahanshah's protection, and you may pass the forest alive. Refuse, and the night will swallow you." Orhan Sahib's men murmured, some spat, some tightened their grips. The offer was crafted not to be accepted but to sow doubt. Why would they die for a prisoner? Why risk a battle when a ruler offered passage? Orhan Sahib raised his hand and the murmurs died. He stepped to the edge of the creek so the torchlight could catch his face, so the enemy could see the man they tried to frighten. His voice crossed the water with steady power. "Tell Shahanshah this," he said. "Mercy is Allah's to give. Threats are the tools of cowards. He calls Yakid protected, then let him come and take him with his own hands." The herald shouted back, "You will be crushed." Orhan Sahib answered, "Then come." Silence followed, thick as smoke. Then slowly the enemy line began to move, not charging yet, but shifting like a great animal positioning itself to strike. Archers stepped forward, shields angled. They were preparing to force a crossing, to break Damir Khan's hold, to push into Orhan Sahib's formation and turn the creek into a slaughter channel. Orhan Sahib turned to his captains, voice low, quick, absolute. "We will not remain here until dawn. Shahanshah's men are many and the forest behind us is still full of embers. We will do what he does not expect." Damir Khan frowned. "We retreat." Orhan Sahib shook his head. "Not retreat, we cut." He pointed to the right where the trees were thinner, where a narrow path ran along the creek, leading toward the enemy's torch clusters. "Their reserve is here, but their supply wagons will be behind on that higher ground. Oil, grain, arrows." Faladios spoke true. "If we choke it, their line weakens." Faladios wiped blood from his mouth, eyes narrowed. "Give me men." Orhan Sahib nodded. You will take Tarhan, Tamir, Boga, and 40, move through the trees, strike their supply, burn it, create smoke, make them believe a larger force has come. Fear is a blade that cuts without sharpening. Tarhan's eyes flashed. And you? Orhan Sahib's gaze turned to the creek. I will hold them here. I will make them commit. When their attention is fixed on breaking our line, you will light the night behind them. Tamir Boga grinned grimly. Fire again, this time in our favor. Orhan Sahib's voice became prayer and command at once. By Allah, do not fail. If you fail, we die in the mud. If you succeed, Shahanshah will learn that even a mighty ruler can be starved like a dog. Tarhan placed a fist to his chest. Faladios did the same, no more words. They vanished into the trees like hunters returning to their element. Orhan Sahib watched them go, then turned back to the men at the creek. Raise the shields, he ordered. Plant the pikes. Let the enemy think we are rooted. Mahmud approached, his eyes darting. Sahib, the men are afraid. Orhan Sahib's answer was simple. So am I. Mahmud blinked, surprised. Orhan Sahib continued, voice quieter but stronger for its honesty. Fear is not shame. Fear is a warning from Allah that life is precious. Shame is what comes when a man betrays his oath because he feared discomfort. He glanced toward Yaqid, bound on the ground. Look at him, he had no fear of Allah, now he fears men, which fear is wiser. Mahmud nodded, swallowing. Across the creek the enemy began their assault. Arrows rose and fell in disciplined waves. Shields absorbed them with dull thuds, but some found gaps and men cried out, falling back, clutching throats, clutching bellies. Damir Khan roared like a bull, rallying men, dragging one wounded soldier back by the collar. Then the enemy tried to cross. They waded into the creek in rows, shields up, pushing forward under covering fire. Orhan Sahib shouted, Hold, do not meet them in water, let them climb, then cut them down. Men waited, teeth clenched, muscles trembling, until the first enemy boots hit the bank. Then steel erupted. Pikes thrust forward, punching into bellies, into thighs, swords hacked down on helmets. Damir Khan's axe split a shield and continued into the man behind it. Abdul Rahman's line held tight, stepping as one, a wall of bodies and faith. The creek became a grinding place where the enemy's dead clogged the current. Water turned dark. Men slipped on blood-slick stones and fell, screaming as they were trampled. Orhan Sahib moved along the line, striking where the shield wall wavered, calling names, reminding men they were seen. A commander's gaze is a weapon. It makes cowards stand and brave men become lions. But the enemy pressed. Their numbers were heavy. Their discipline was trained. They were not merely farmers with spears. They were Shahanshah's soldiers, and behind them was the desperation of a ruler who could not afford another humiliation. The sky began to pale faintly at its lowest edge, not dawn yet, but the promise that night would not last forever, and with that faint paling came urgency. Shahanshah would want to break them before light revealed the cost. Orhan Sahib's arms ached, his blade was wet, his breath tasted like iron. And still no sign yet from Faladios and Tarhan. Then at last, far behind the enemy line, a glow appeared among the trees, small at first, then stronger. A torch, no, too broad. Fire! A sudden bloom of flame climbed into the night behind Shahanshah's reserve, followed by thick smoke that rolled upward like a dark banner of its own. Shouts rose from the enemy rear, confused, frantic. Their line hesitated for the span of a heartbeat, just long enough for doubt to pierce discipline. Orhan Sahib's chest tightened with fierce relief. Faladios had struck, Tarhan had struck. The enemy's attention fractured. Some soldiers turned their heads, their bodies still facing the creek, but their minds pulled backward. A unit began to peel away, trying to rush toward the fire. Orhan Sahib seized the moment like a man seizing a rope above a cliff. Now, he roared, push them back into the water. His men surged forward, renewed by the sight of smoke behind the enemy. Pikes drove, shields bashed, swords hacked. The enemy front line collapsed, forced backward, stumbling into the creek where the current and bodies made retreat clumsy and deadly. Damir Khan bellowed, for the faiths, for the banner. Abdul Rahman's men shouted until their throats burned. Across the creek, the herald's voice tried to impose order, but it vanished under chaos. The fire behind them grew, fed by oil and grain, and the smoke thickened, turning torches into weak stars swallowed by cloud. And then through that smoke another sound came, heavy, rhythmic, unmistakable. A war drum. Not Orhan Sahib's drum. Not Shahanshah's common signal. A deeper beat, older, like the heartbeat of an approaching doom. Orhan Sahib's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes narrowed. In the smoke behind the enemy, shapes moved, taller shapes, armored differently, advancing with deliberate pace as if the fire did not frighten them but guided them. Mahmud, standing near Orhan Sahib, whispered, "Who are they?" Orhan Sahib did not answer at once. His gaze sharpened, reading banners through haze, reading armor silhouettes, reading the confidence of their steps. Then he spoke, and his voice carried a weight that made even his fiercest men glance at him. "Shahanshah has called another hand to this battle," Orhan Sahib said, "a hand he swore he would never need." He looked down at Yaqid, bound and gagged, eyes wide now with something close to terror, as if even the traitor recognized the drum. Orhan Sahib leaned closer to Yaqid, speaking as the war thundered around them. "You sold yourself to a desperate ruler," he said quietly. "Now you will see what desperate rulers unleash." The drumbeat grew louder. The smoke behind the enemy parted in places, and the outline of the newcomers sharpened. An elite guard, perhaps, or a foreign contingent hired with bitter coin, men who marched as if they had no fear of hell because they had already lived in it. Orhan Sahib straightened, lifting his sword again, feeling its weight like the weight of history itself. He called out to his captains, voice strong despite exhaustion, "Hold the creek, do not chase the fleeing, keep our line. Faladios and Tarhan will return, but until they do, we are the spine. If we break, all breaks." He looked toward the smoke and fire, toward the drum, toward the oncoming shapes. Then, as if the night wished to leave one last curse before dawn, Yaqid twisted against his bonds and managed to force out a muffled sound through the gag. Half laugh, half sob, eyes gleaming with the ugly joy of a man who would rather see the world burn than admit he was wrong. Orhan Sahib did not look away from the advancing doom. "In the name of Allah," he whispered, and it was no longer comfort, no longer ritual. It was a vow carved into the air. The fire behind Shahanshah's line roared higher, the smoke rolled thicker, the drumbeat came closer, and somewhere in that choking dark, moving toward the creek, toward Orhan Sahib, toward the bound traitor at his feet, another banner began to rise, not Shahanshah's, not Orhan Sahib, but a third sign that promised a new cruelty. And the war, which had seemed for a moment like it might be decided by flame and cleverness, opened its mouth again, wider than before, ready to swallow the next hour whole. The drum came closer, and with it, a sound like the earth groaning beneath iron-shod feet. Smoke curled upward from the burning supplies behind Shahanshah's line, black and thick, blotting out the last faint scatter of stars. The air tasted of charred grain and burning oil, and beneath it, the old familiar taste of fear. Orhan Sahib stood at the edge of the creek, his men braced behind him, and he watched the shapes resolve from the haze like ghosts given armor and purpose. These were not common soldiers. Their shields bore a mark he had not seen in these lands for many seasons, a crescent wrapped in chain, the sign of the eastern mercenaries, men whose loyalty was measured in weight of silver and whose hearts had been bartered away long ago. Daimir Khan moved beside Orhan Sahib, breathing hard, his axe still dripping with water and worse. "Sahib," he said, voice low and raw, "those are not Shahanshah's men." Orhan Sahib did not take his eyes from the approaching column. "No," he said quietly, "those are the men Shahanshah bought when his pride turned to desperation. Those are the Gurzan Legion." The name fell between them like a stone into deep water. Even Daimir Khan, who had fought beside the best and worst of men, stiffened. The Gurzan were known. They did not fight for faith. They did not fight for honor. They fought because they were paid to destroy, and they were very, very good at it. Behind Orhan Sahib, Mahmud's voice trembled. "If they join the line." Orhan Sahib cut him off, voice edged with steel. "Then we fight them like we fight all enemies, with faith, with discipline, and with the knowledge that a man hired by coin dies as easily as a man driven by rage." Mahmud swallowed and nodded, though his grip on his spear tightened until the wood creaked. The Gurzan column reached the rear of Shahanshah's scattered forces and immediately imposed order where there had been chaos. Commands rang out in a foreign tongue, harsh and clipped. The fleeing soldiers stopped, turned, reformed, shields locked again, archers repositioned. The fire behind them still burned, but now it was framed by discipline, as if even flame itself bowed to the Gurzan's presence. Their captain stepped forward into the torchlight, a tall man, scarred along the jaw, his armor pitted and dark from 100 battles. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice carried with the authority of someone who had given orders in 12 languages and watched them all obeyed. "Who commands the line at the creek?" he called. Orhan Sahib stepped forward, visible, unyielding. "I do." The Gurzen captain studied him across the distance, and for a moment there was silence, the kind of silence that comes when two predators meet in the wild and measure each other before the first strike. Then the captain spoke again, his accent thick but his meaning clear. "You fight well for a small force. Shahanshah has paid us to end this. You may leave your prisoner and your arms. Go, you will not be pursued." Orhan Sahib's answer came without hesitation. "And if I refuse?" The Gurzen captain smiled, but it was not a smile of warmth. It was the smile of a man who had heard that question many times and had buried the men who asked it. "Then you will die here in mud and darkness, and your names will be forgotten before the sun rises." Murmurs rippled through Orhan Sahib's men. Some shifted their feet. Some glanced toward the fire, toward the trees, calculating retreat paths in their minds. Orhan Sahib raised his hand and the murmurs stopped. He looked back at his captains, Damir Khan, Abdul Rahman, Mahmud, Altuddin Sahib, each of them bloodied, exhausted, but still standing. He saw in their eyes what he needed to see, not certainty of victory, but certainty of purpose. He turned back to the Gurzen captain. "Tell Shahanshah that men do not measure their worth by whether they are remembered," Orhan Sahib called. "They measure it by whether they stood when it mattered. Tell him we stood." The captain's smile faded. He raised a fist and the Gurzen line began to move forward, slow and inexorable, shields locked in formation so tight it looked like a single beast with 1,000 legs. Orhan Sahib stepped back from the creek edge and spoke to his men, voice low but carrying the force of command. "We will not meet them at the water. Fall back 30 paces. Make them cross, make them climb, make them bleed for every step." Damir Khan hesitated. "If we fall back, they will think we are broken." Orhan Sahib's eyes were hard. "Let them think it. Pride is a poor shield. Ground is just earth. What matters is that when they reach us, we are ready." The men obeyed, stepping backward in disciplined rows, shields still raised, pikes still angled forward. They moved like a single body, and though the retreat felt like surrender to some, it was strategy, cold, calculated, ruthless. Across the creek, the Gurzen reached the water and began to wade through without hesitation. Their shields absorbed the few arrows Orhan Sahib's archers loosed, and they did not falter. Behind them, Shahanshah's reformed soldiers followed, emboldened now by the presence of these hired killers. The creek churned again, filled with boots and bodies. The enemy climbed the near bank, and the distance between the two forces narrowed. Orhan Sahib stood in the center of his line, sword ready, watching. His heart beat steady, though his body ached with fatigue. He counted silently, 1 breath, 2, 3, waiting for the moment when the enemy would be committed, when their formation would stretch just enough to expose weakness. Then from the trees to the left, a sudden shout erupted. "Allahu Akbar!" It was Tarhan's voice, raw and fierce, and with it came the sound of steel meeting flesh, the screams of men caught by surprise. Tarhan and his strike force, Faladios, Tamir Boga, and the 40, had circled back through the burning supply lines and now fell upon the Gurzen's exposed flank like wolves onto a wounded stag. Tarhan's blade moved in wide, brutal arcs, cutting down a Gurzen soldier before the man could turn. Faladios fought beside him, his face streaked with ash and blood, every strike precise and deadly. Tamir Boga drove his spear into the ribs of an enemy officer, then wrenched it free and drove it into another. The Gurzen line buckled, not broken. These were professionals, but disrupted, forced to split their attention, forced to turn shields to meet the new threat. Orhan Sahib did not waste the opening. "Now," he roared, "forward, drive them back into the water." His men surged ahead with a cry that shook the trees. The pikes thrust forward into the Gurzen shields, pushing, grinding. Swords hacked at the edges where shields did not quite meet. Damir Khan's axe rose and fell like the hammer of judgment itself, and where it landed, men crumpled. The Gurzen captain barked orders, trying to restore the line, but the chaos of fire, flanking attack, and renewed assault from the front fractured his control. The creek, which had been an avenue of advance, became a trap. Men stumbled, slipped, fell into water already choked with the dead. Abdul Rahman's pike drove into a Gurzen soldier's throat, and the man gurgled, eyes wide, before collapsing backward into the current. Mahmud swung his sword wildly, more desperate than skilled, but desperation had its own power, and he took a man's arm at the elbow, severing it with a wet crack. Orhan Sahib fought with controlled precision, his blade finding gaps, finding wrists, finding necks. He did not shout. He did not waste breath. Every motion was deliberate, the result of years of training, of battles fought when the world was younger and hope felt less fragile. And then, through the chaos, he saw the Gurzen captain cutting his way toward him, shield raised, sword gleaming with fresh blood. The captain's eyes locked onto Orhan Sahib with recognition, not of friendship, but of respect. He knew a leader when he saw one, and leaders, when killed, often broke the armies they commanded. The captain shoved his own men aside and advanced toward Orhan Sahib with grim purpose. Orhan Sahib saw him coming. He stepped forward to meet him, and the space between them collapsed in a heartbeat. Their blades met with a crash that rang above the noise of battle. The Gurzen captain was strong, his strikes heavy, powered by muscle honed through decades of war. Orhan Sahib parried, feeling the shock travel up his arm, feeling the weight of the man's intent. The captain swung again, aiming for Orhan Sahib's head. Orhan Sahib ducked low, the blade hissing over him, and he drove his shoulder into the captain's shield, trying to unbalance him. The captain grunted but held firm, then slammed the edge of his shield down toward Orhan Sahib's skull. Orhan Sahib twisted aside, the shield grazing his shoulder, and slashed upward. His blade caught the captain's forearm, cutting through leather and drawing blood. The captain hissed but did not falter. He kicked out, catching Orhan Sahib in the ribs, and Orhan Sahib staggered back, pain lancing through his side. The captain pressed forward, shield raised, blade seeking the killing blow. But then Tarhan was there. Tarhan's shield slammed into the Gurzen captain from the side with the force of a battering ram. The captain stumbled, knocked off balance, and Tarhan's sword came down in a brutal overhead strike. The captain raised his own blade to block, and the two swords met with a scream of metal. Orhan Sahib recovered, stepping forward again, and now it was 2 against 1. The captain's eyes flicked between them, calculating, weighing. He was skilled, but not invincible. Tarhan feinted left, and the captain moved to block. In that instant, Orhan Sahib struck, his blade driving low beneath the shield into the captain's thigh. The blade bit deep, severing muscle, and the captain's leg buckled. He fell to one knee, blood pouring from the wound, his face twisted not in fear but in fury, fury that he had been bested, fury that his coin would not save him. Orhan Sahib stood over him, breathing hard, blade raised. For a moment, their eyes met. The captain spoke through gritted teeth, his accent thick. "You fight like you believe." Orhan Sahib's voice was cold. "Because I do." The captain smiled faintly, blood on his lips. "Then you are a fool." Orhan Sahib's blade came down, swift and final, and the captain's eyes went dark. Around them, the Gurzen line wavered. Their leader had fallen. The flank attack continued to tear into them. The fire behind still burned, cutting off easy retreat, and before them stood men who would not break. One by one, the Gurzen began to disengage, stepping back, shields raised defensively. They were professionals. They knew when a contract was no longer worth the blood. Shahanshah's soldiers, seeing the mercenaries retreat, began to falter as well. Panic spread like wildfire. Men turned and ran, splashing back through the creek, abandoning weapons, abandoning formation. Orhan Sahib did not order a pursuit. His men were exhausted, wounded, barely standing. To chase now would be to scatter, and to scatter would be to invite ambush or encirclement. "Hold the line," he commanded, voice hoarse. "Let them run. We have won the ground. Do not throw it away for glory." His men obeyed, though some strained against the desire to chase the fleeing enemy. They held, shields up, breath ragged, watching as the night swallowed Shahanshah's broken forces. The drumbeat which had heralded the Gurzen's arrival faded into silence. The fire behind the enemy lines still burned, but lower now, its fuel spent, smoke thinning. Tarhan stood beside Orhan Sahib, blood dripping from his sword, face streaked with soot and sweat. "The supplies are ash," he said quietly. "Their wagons burned, their grain is scattered, they will starve before they rebuild." Faladios approached, limping slightly, a gash along his ribs bound hastily with cloth. "Yakid still breathes," he said, nodding toward where the traitor lay bound, eyes wide with terror and rage, watching the ruin of Shahanshah's assault. Orhan Sahib looked down at Yakid, and for a long moment he said nothing. The night had been long. The cost had been high. Men he had known, men who had prayed beside him, lay dead in the mud and the creek, their names soon to be spoken in grief by those who loved them. But they had held, they had stood. Orhan Sahib knelt beside Yakid and pulled the gag from his mouth. Yakid gasped, coughing, spitting blood. "You lost," Yakid rasped, voice broken. "Even if you hold tonight, Shahanshah has more men, more gold, more." Orhan Sahib silenced him with a single raised hand. "Shahanshah has fear," he said quietly. "He fears his own people, he fears rebellion, he fears that if we are not crushed, others will see that resistance is possible. That is why he hired the Gurzon, that is why he burns his own supplies in desperation. Fear does not build empires, it eats them." Yakid's eyes narrowed. "And you think you will build something better?" Orhan Sahib looked past him, toward the creek, toward the bodies, toward the men who still stood despite everything. "I do not think," he said. I obey the command to stand for justice, to protect the weak, to fight when fighting is all that remains. If I fail, Allah will judge, but I will not fail by betraying my oath." He stood, turning to Damir Khan. "Bind him tighter, we march at first light." Damir Khan nodded and dragged Yakid away. Orhan Sahib walked slowly along the line, speaking to his men, checking wounds, calling them by name. He did not rush. Each man needed to be seen, to be reminded that his sacrifice mattered. Mahmud approached, holding his side where an arrow had grazed him. "Sahib," he said, voice trembling with exhaustion. "What now?" "Shahanshah will regroup, he will send more." Orhan Sahib placed a hand on Mahmud's shoulder. "Then we will meet them again, but not here, not in the mud. We will move to higher ground, to the old fortress at Kara Ridge. It is defensible, it has wells. We will make him come to us, and every step he takes will cost him." Mahmud's eyes widened. "Kara Ridge is 3 days' march." Orhan Sahib nodded. "Then we leave at dawn. Tell the men, gather what we can carry, burn what we cannot, leave nothing for Shahanshah to reclaim." As Mahmud moved to relay the orders, Tarhin stepped close, his voice low. "Sahib, there are wounded who cannot march." Orhan Sahib's face tightened. This was the cruelty of command, the decisions that had no good answer. "We take them," he said. "Even if it slows us, even if it costs us, we do not abandon our own." Tarhin's expression softened, just for a moment, and he nodded. The night began to pale at the edges, the faintest gray creeping into the eastern sky. The smoke thinned. The fire behind the enemy lines had died to embers. The creek ran quieter now, though its water was dark. Orhan Sahib stood alone for a moment, looking toward the east, toward the coming dawn. He was tired, his body ached, his ribs throbbed where the Gurzon captain had kicked him, but he did not sit, he did not rest. He thought of his father long dead, who had taught him that leadership was not glory but endurance. He thought of the men who followed him, who trusted him with their lives, their families, their futures. He thought of Yakid, who had chosen silver over soul, and how easy that choice must have seemed at the time. And he prayed silently that he would never face such a choice, that even in the worst darkness he would remember why he stood. Behind him, the camp began to stir. Men wrapped the dead in cloaks, others gathered weapons, repaired shields, refilled water skins. The wounded were lifted onto makeshift stretchers. Horses were saddled, the column prepared to move. Altadin Sahib approached, his shoulder still bandaged, his face pale but determined. "The supplies are ready, Sahib. We lost 2 mules, but the rest are sound." Orhan Sahib nodded. "Good, you will lead the rear guard. If Shahanshah sends scouts, I want them to see strength, not flight." Altadin Sahib bowed. "As you command." Faladios appeared beside Orhan Sahib, cleaned somewhat, though his eyes still burned with the fury of battle. "You should rest," he said bluntly. Orhan Sahib shook his head. "I will rest when we reach the ridge." Faladios studied him for a moment, then spoke quietly. "You know Shahanshah will not let this stand. He will call more mercenaries. He will offer more gold. He will bleed his own people dry to crush you." Orhan Sahib's voice was steady. "Then he will bleed, and when his people see what he becomes in his desperation, they will remember. They will remember that tyranny always devours itself." Faladios smiled faintly, though it was a grim smile. "You sound like a poet." Orhan Sahib's expression did not change. "I sound like a man who has seen enough graves." The first light of dawn broke over the trees, pale and cold, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The bodies lay still, no longer men but monuments to the cost of ambition and betrayal. The creek reflected the sky, gray and silent. Orhan Sahib raised his hand and the column began to move. Men fell into line, shields on backs, weapons in hands, eyes forward. Yakid was dragged along, bound and gagged again, his face bruised and swollen, his arrogance stripped away by consequence. They moved through the forest, leaving the creek behind, leaving the ashes of Shahanshah's supplies, leaving the dead to the mercy of Allah. As they marched, Turhan walked beside Orhan Sahib, silent for a long time. Then he spoke, voice low, "Do you believe we can hold Kara Ridge?" Orhan Sahib did not answer immediately. He looked ahead at the road that wound through the trees, at the men who followed him even though they were tired, even though they were afraid. "I believe," he said finally, "that a man can hold anything if he remembers why he holds it." Turhan nodded slowly and they walked on. The forest thinned as the morning deepened and the path began to climb, winding upward toward higher ground. Behind them, the smoke from the battlefield rose like a dark pillar, visible for miles, a message written in ash and ruin. Somewhere far behind, in the remnants of his camp, Shahanshah would be receiving word of the defeat. He would rage, he would demand answers, he would summon more captains, more soldiers, more coin from his vaults. He would not stop. He could not stop because to stop would be to admit weakness, and weakness was the death of kings. But Orhan Sahib did not think of Shahanshah as a king. He thought of him as a man driven by fear and pride, a man who had forgotten that power was not a throne but a burden. And burdens, when carried too long without wisdom, broke the back. By midday, the column reached a clearing where the trees opened to reveal the land below, miles of forest, of rivers, of roads that wound like veins through the body of the earth. And far in the distance, barely visible through haze, the outline of Kara Ridge rose against the sky, ancient and waiting. Orhan Sahib stopped and looked toward it, his men gathered behind him, silent, watching. Daimir Khan stepped forward. 3 days, he said quietly. Orhan Sahib nodded. 3 days. Abdul Rahman approached, his face grim. "And if Shahanshah reaches us before we fortify?" Orhan Sahib's gaze did not waver. "Then we fortify as we march, we do not wait for safety, we build it." He turned to face his men, all of them, captains and common soldiers, wounded and whole, young and weathered. They looked back at him, waiting. "We have won the night," Orhan Sahib said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "But the war is not over. Shahanshah will come again. He will bring more men, more steel, more desperation. And when he comes, we will meet him at Kara Ridge. We will turn stone into fortress. We will turn faith into walls. And we will show him that no amount of gold can buy what we carry." He raised his sword not in triumph but in promise. "We carry the will to stand, and that, brothers, is worth more than all the silver in his vaults." The men did not cheer, they were too tired for that. But they nodded and they lifted their weapons and they began to march again, step by step, toward the ridge that would become their stand. Orhan Sahib walked at the front, Turhan beside him, Faladios a few paces back, silent and watchful. The road climbed higher, the air grew colder and the sky stretched wide above them, indifferent and eternal. Behind them, the forest held its secrets. Ahead, the ridge waited like a promise or a grave. And somewhere in the distance, unseen but felt, Shahanshah's banners began to move again, gathering, reforming, marching toward the same inevitable confrontation. The story was not over, the war was not won, but in that moment, as the sun climbed and the road stretched ahead, Orhan Sahib felt something he had not felt in many nights. Not hope, not certainty, but resolve. And resolve, he knew, was the only foundation strong enough to build upon when the world itself was trembling. The column moved on, and the earth bore their weight in silence. Night fell again, and with it the ridge became a black crown upon the mountain's brow, and the fortress stones drank the last light until even the cracks between them looked like thin mouths waiting to whisper treachery. Below, Shahanshah's camp burned with 1,000 small fires, and the siege tower, half-born in daylight, stood in their midst like a tall omen, its ribs of timber lashed tight, its wheels newly fitted, its face turned toward Kara Ridge as if it could already taste the defender's breath. Inside the walls, Orhan Sahib did not permit the night to be merely night. He made it an instrument. He made it a veil for decisions that would cut deeper than swords. He walked the battlements while men tightened ropes, sharpened blades, and stacked stones into neat piles for hurling. Abdul Rahman's archers oiled their bowstrings and counted their arrows as if each shaft were a day of life. Damir Khan moved among the men with a heavy calm, placing his broad hand on shoulders, speaking short words that did not flatter, only anchored. "Stand," he would say, "breathe, watch." Altadin Sahib kept the rear passage sealed and guarded, his eyes narrowed at every shadow, for he had seen too many forts fall not to engines, but to doors opened from within. Mahmud and Mustafa carried water to the wounded, and the men drank as if each sip might be their last prayer made liquid. Then Mahmud returned from the inner yard with his face pale and his voice low, as if speaking louder might wake the walls themselves. "Sahib," he said, "Zarkan's cell, it is empty." The words did not explode, they sank into the silence of Kara Ridge and made it heavier. Orhan Sahib's gaze did not flicker. "When?" "We do not know," Mahmud answered. "The guard says he heard nothing." Orhan Sahib looked toward the dark corridor mouths, toward the old stone passages that ran through the ruin like veins in dead flesh. "He did not leave without a key," he said, "and he did not leave without help." Tarhan stood close, his voice a low burn. "Then there is more than one serpent." Orhan Sahib nodded almost imperceptibly, as if agreeing with a truth he had already tasted. "Yes," he said, "and tonight the serpent will try to open a door." He called for Jarkata Sahib, a man of sharp eyes and sharper patience, a captain who could sit in darkness without moving and still hear the difference between a rat's footstep and a man. Jarkata Sahib arrived, bowing once. "Sahib." Orhan Sahib spoke quietly. "Take 6, hide at the inner gate and the well yard, not to fight openly, to watch. If anyone moves where he should not, do not shout first, catch first." Jarkata Sahib's eyes hardened. "As you command." Orhan Sahib then called Al-Aliuddin Sahib, a calm-minded captain whose mind worked like a mason's, always measuring weight, angle, strain. He had been silent all day, listening, studying the wall's weak points. Al-Aliuddin Sahib, Orhan Sahib said, "I want fire pots prepared, not many, we cannot waste oil, but enough to kiss that tower with flame if it reaches our wall." Al-Aliuddin Sahib bowed. "We will mix pitch with what we have, it will cling, it will burn." Orhan Sahib's voice was low, "And pray it burns before it climbs." As the hours crawled, the fortress settled into a silence so tight it felt like a cloth drawn over the mouth of panic. Only the wind moved freely, and even it seemed to tread carefully. Then Tarhan came to Orhan Sahib in the shadow of a broken tower, his face half-lit by a small lamp shielded with cloth. "The men chosen for the raid are ready," Tarhan said. "Faladios waits." Orhan Sahib nodded and stepped into the darkness where Faladios stood with Tamir Boga and Mustafa, and Zarkan's absence hung over them like a curse. Faladios's eyes were bright, fierce. "We go for the tower," he said. "We burn it or die under it." Orhan Sahib did not answer with poetry. He answered with orders shaped like knives. "You will go down the western slope," Orhan Sahib said, "not the rear. Shahanshah expects us there now. He expects us to repeat the same path and bleed on it. You will take the broken goat trail that runs beneath the ridge. Jarkata Sahib once used it in winter to bring salt up unseen. It is narrow, but it hides." Tamir Boga nodded, remembering. "The trail with loose stones." Orhan Sahib's eyes held his. "Loose stones make noise, wrap your boots, move like breath." He turned to Faladios. "You will not hunt men, you will hunt rope and wheel, cut the lashings, burn the joints. If you cannot burn the tower, cripple it. A tower that cannot move is a monument to Shahanshah's pride." Faladios's voice was a vow. "By Allah." Orhan Sahib then faced Tarhan and his tone changed, not softer but more intimate, the way commanders speak when they place a man's life into a task that might not return it. "Tarhan," he said, "you will not go with Faladios into the heart of their camp." Tarhan's jaw tightened. "Sahib." Orhan Sahib raised a hand. "Listen, Faladios will do the burning, you will do the hunting. Yaqid is not merely a prisoner escaped, he is a lantern for Shahanshah in darkness. He points at our weak stone, he whispers our habits, he is an arrow fired from inside the quiver." Tarhan's eyes narrowed. "Where will he be?" Orhan Sahib's gaze shifted toward the enemy camp below, toward the largest fires where nobles slept and decisions were made. "He will not sleep among common soldiers, he will sleep near Shahanshah's pavilion, guarded like a prized lyre. He will believe himself safe. That belief is the rope we will tighten." Tarhan's breathing steadied into discipline. "Give me men." Orhan Sahib shook his head once. No men, too many footsteps, you will take only killal, he moves like mist. If you are seen, you will not save each other. You will separate and return to the ridge by different paths. Tarhan's voice was low, and if I find him? Orhan Sahib's answer was cold. Bring his tongue if you cannot bring his body. Let Shahanshah lose his poison. Tarhan's eyes hardened until they looked like black stone. By Allah Sahib. Orhan Sahib looked at them all, Tarhan, Faladios, Tamir Boga, Mustafa, Killal, and he felt the old bitter truth of war. The best men are always the ones asked to step into the deepest dark. He lifted his hand, palm upward, as if holding their fates. May Allah guard your steps, he said. May he blind your enemies. May he count your courage among the deeds that weigh heavy on the day when all banners are dust. No one answered with loud pride. They answered with bowed heads and tightened grips. Then they vanished into the night. Orhan Sahib remained on the wall, watching the valley with eyes that refused to close. He stationed Damir Khan near the main breach and Abdul Rahman on the north face. He placed Altuddin Sahib at the inner gate, and he told Mahmud to walk the lines and speak only 2 words to any man whose courage wavered. Alices. Below, Shahanshah's camp pulsed with life even at night, guards changing, horses shifting, men laughing too loudly around fires as if laughter could convince their hearts they were not afraid. The siege tower stood dark against the glow, its shadow stretching like a long finger toward Kara Ridge. Time moved like a slow blade. Then, as the night deepened beyond its midpoint, a faint orange flicker appeared near the tower's base. Orhan Sahib's eyes narrowed. He did not celebrate. In war, a flame can be victory or trap. The flicker grew. It crawled along the wood like a hungry thing, catching rope, licking pitch, finding the places where craftsmen had sealed joints with resin. For a heartbeat, it seemed the tower itself had begun to breathe fire. A shout rose in the enemy camp, then another. Then a surge of movement, men running with buckets, men screaming orders, men forming lines to carry water. Orhan Sahib whispered, Alhamdulillah, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement that Allah had granted a crack in Shahanshah's plan. The flame climbed higher. Then the camp exploded into chaos. Not the chaos of panic alone, but the chaos of desperate discipline, men trying to save what their ruler had promised would break Kara Ridge by dawn. Water splashed. Smoke rose thick. The tower's side caught, then a supporting beam groaned, cracking, sending sparks upward like fleeing souls. Orhan Sahib watched and felt the cold calculation in him sharpen. If Shahanshah's men were pulled toward the tower, their guard around the pavilion might thin. Tarhan would have his moment. But Orhan Sahib did not allow his mind to drift into hope. Hope is a sweet wine, and it makes commanders drunk. He kept watching the fortress interior too, for betrayal does not announce itself with horns, it slips. And before the enemy camp had even finished reacting to the fire, a small sound rose behind Orhan Sahib, stone scraping stone. He turned his head slowly, eyes cutting into the inner yard. A shadow moved near the inner gate. Not a guard walking his round, not a captain. A shape that hugged the wall, crouched careful as if it knew where the moonlight fell and where it did not. Orhan Sahib did not shout. He lifted his hand once, and out of darkness Jarkata Sahib and his men emerged like hunters who had been waiting with breath held. The shadow froze. Jarkata Sahib spoke softly, "Move and you die." A voice answered from the shadow, bitter and trembling. So it is true, Orhan Sahib watches even his own. The torch was brought closer, hooded, and light fell on the face. Zarkin. His eyes were wide, his mouth tight, and in his hand he held a small iron key and a dagger slick with something dark. Jarkata Sahib seized his wrist and twisted until the dagger clattered to stone. Zarkin hissed in pain, then spat words like poison. "You will die here, all of you, Shahanshah has promised." Orhan Sahib stepped forward and his voice cut through Zarkin's spit like a sword through cloth. "Promised what?" he asked quietly. "A full belly with an empty soul, a warm bed bought with blood." Zarkin's jaw clenched, trying to hold pride together. "Promised life." Orhan Sahib looked at the dagger on the stone. "Whose life did you take to purchase yours?" he asked. Zarkin's eyes flicked away. Orhan Sahib's voice lowered further, and in that lowering was a terrible calm. "You helped Yaqid escape," he said. "You opened his rope, you cut the guards." Zarkin's lips curled. They were fools to guard him. He belongs with Shahanshah. Orhan Sahib's gaze did not waver. And you belong where? Zarkin lifted his chin, defiant now that he was cornered. I belong with the living. Orhan Sahib nodded once as if accepting the confession for what it was. Then he turned to Jarkata Sahib. Bind him, he ordered, and bring the men who stood watch on Yakid's chamber. I want to see their eyes. If they were bribed, they will confess before dawn, or they will confess before Allah. Zarkin struggled as ropes bit into him. You will lose, he hissed. Even if you kill me, you will lose. Shahanshah will grind you down. Orhan Sahib leaned close enough that Zarkin could see the exhaustion in his eyes and the unbroken thing beneath it. Then let him grind, Orhan Sahib whispered. Stone grinds the blade too. Zarkin was dragged away, snarling. Orhan Sahib returned to the battlement, and below, the siege tower continued to burn. But then he saw what made his throat tight. Shahanshah's men were not letting it die. They were cutting away burning sections, smothering flames with wet hides, pulling buckets from wagons, throwing sand. They were saving the tower's skeleton. Faladios had wounded the tower, but Shahanshah's camp had teeth and hands. Orhan Sahib's mind raced. A crippled tower might still reach the wall. Even half-burned wood can carry men. Then a second glow flared farther away near a wagon line. It was smaller, but it spread fast as if oil had been poured. Faladios, he was not content to burn one thing. He was burning their breath itself, their supplies. Shouts rose again, men ran again. The camp became a boiling pot of confusion. Orhan Sahib held the wall like a man holding a prayer bead. Each moment counted, each moment turned. And somewhere below in that chaos, Tarhan moved. Tarhan and Killil slid through the dark as if born from it. They did not approach the pavilion by the obvious path. They crawled behind a line of tethered horses, their bodies low, their breath shallow. A horse snorted once, and Killil whispered a calming sound, hand on muzzle, and the beast quieted as if sensing death nearby. They watched guards run toward the burning tower, watched men shout, watched torches swing wildly, and in that frenzy the pavilion's perimeter weakened, the way even a strong man's grip weakens when his attention is stolen by fire. Tarhan's eyes searched for the thing that mattered. He found it. A smaller tent near the pavilion, guarded by two men who stood too stiff, too careful, as if aware the one inside was valuable poison. The tent's fabric was dark, but a candle glowed within, casting a faint silhouette moving, restless, packing. Killil leaned close, whispering Yakid. Tarhan nodded once. There was no joy in his face, only purpose. They waited until one guard turned his head toward the tower fire, then Tarhan moved. He crossed the space between shadow and tent in 3 silent heartbeats. His hand clamped onto the first guard's mouth, pulling him back. The man's eyes widened, but Tarhan's blade slid into the soft place beneath the jaw. The guard's body stiffened, then sagged like a cut rope. The second guard spun, reaching for his spear, but Killil was already there, his knife flashing. The spear fell from numb fingers. The guard collapsed without a sound loud enough to wake the camp. Tarhan dragged both bodies into darkness and gestured to Killil, who slid a small opening at the rear of the tent. Tarhan slid inside. Candlelight revealed Yakid. He sat hunched, face still bruised, a fine robe thrown over his shoulders as if Shahanshah had dressed him like a pet. His eyes were sharp, darting. He looked up and saw Tarhan, and for a heartbeat his arrogance tried to rise. Then it died. Tarhan closed the flap slowly behind him, and the sound was soft as a grave being covered. Yakid's voice trembled, trying to find strength. You, he said, Shahanshah will. Tarhan stepped forward and the candlelight caught his sword's edge, and in that glow it looked like a line of fate. Silence, Tarhan said. Yakid swallowed, eyes flicking toward the front exit. You cannot leave, he whispered. The camp is. Tarhan's voice was low, deadly. I did not come to leave easily. Yakid tried to stand, and his hand moved toward a dagger on the rug. Tarhan's sword tip kissed the dagger's handle. Do not, he said. Yakid's breathing quickened. Orhan Sahib will lose, he spat, but the words were weaker now, the spit turning to panic. You cannot hold. Shahanshah's tower will climb your walls, he will. Tarhan stepped closer until Yakid's back touched the tent pole. You talk of towers, Tarhan said. I talk of throats. Yakid's eyes widened. If you kill me, Shahanshah will slaughter more captives. Tarhan's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, he hesitated, not from softness, but because the enemy had used innocent blood as a chain around their decisions. Then Tarhan spoke words that sounded like a verdict. "If I spare you, you will slaughter more from behind," he said. "Your tongue will keep cutting. I will not let you buy life with other men's children." Yakid's voice rose, desperate now. "I can give you something, a gate code, a weakness in Shahanshah's line," his captains argue his men. Tarhan leaned in. "You gave your oath once," he whispered. "I saw you pray, I saw you speak of Allah. If you could sell that, you will sell anything." Yakid's eyes flicked to the tent flap and he lunged, not toward Tarhan but toward escape. Tarhan moved like a closing trap. His shield arm slammed Yakid into the pole and the candle toppled, flame-licking fabric for a moment before Tarhan's boots stamped it out. Darkness swallowed them except for faint light seeping through cloth. Yakid struggled, clawing, whispering curses. Tarhan's grip tightened like iron around a snake. "You will not die as a hero," Tarhan murmured. "You will die as you lived, quietly in the dark, without honor." Yakid's voice cracked. "Allah." Tarhan's reply was harsh. "Do not call his name now." Steel flashed. A short, efficient cut. Yakid's breath hitched, his body stiffened. Then the strength drained out of him and his weight sagged into Tarhan's arms like a man finally accepting what he had earned. For a heartbeat, Tarhan held him, not as a brother, not as a friend, but as a burden removed from the world. Then Tarhan lowered Yakid to the ground and spoke to Killil through the slit. "Done." Killil's voice was tight. "The camp stirs, we must go." Tarhan looked down once more and the darkness hid Yakid's face, but it could not hide the truth of his end. Tarhan did not spit. He did not curse. He simply turned away, as if refusing to grant the traitor even the dignity of being mourned. They slipped out, leaving the body to be found by Shahanshah's men like a message written in blood. But war rarely permits clean departure. As Tarhan and Killil moved between tents, a shout rose behind them. Someone had found the dead guards. Torches swung. A horn sounded sharp. "Assassins!" a voice screamed. Men surged toward the pavilion. Spears gleamed. Dogs barked, straining on ropes. Killil whispered, "They will close the paths." Tarhan's eyes scanned, measuring. "We go through the horses," he said, and there was no hesitation. They rushed to the tether line. A guard stepped in their path, spear thrusting. Tarhan's shield caught the spearhead and shoved it aside, and his sword cut the guard's arm at the elbow. The man screamed, and Killil's knife finished it with a quick thrust that silenced. But the scream had done its work. More men ran toward them, torches in hand, faces twisted with fear and fury. Tarhan and Killil vaulted over a low rope line, weaving through nervous horses. One horse reared, hooves striking air, and Killil nearly fell beneath it. Tarhan grabbed his collar and yanked him forward, saving him by force. Arrows began to fly, blind shots in torchlight. One struck a horse and the animal shrieked, thrashing, dragging ropes, knocking men down. Chaos spread, good chaos, the kind that hides two shadows among 100. Tarhan and Killil reached the darker edge of the camp where scrub and stone began. They ran low, breath burning, legs pounding, and behind them Shahanshah's men shouted, some pursuing, some turning back toward the pavilion in panic. Because they had found Yakid. And the knowledge that the traitor was dead would not simply anger Shahanshah, it would unravel him. Up on the ridge, Orhan Sahib saw movement in the camp that did not look like mere reaction to fire. Torches converged toward the pavilion like insects toward carrion. A loud wail rose, high, furious. Orhan Sahib's eyes narrowed. Something had happened. Then faintly above the noise, he heard a new sound. A roar that was not a soldier's cry, not a captain's order. Shahanshah's voice. It carried up the slope in broken fragments, but the fury was clear enough. A ruler's rage at losing his knife. Orhan Sahib closed his eyes for a heartbeat and whispered, "Allahu Akbar," not as a celebration but as a grounding. Allah is greater than Shahanshah, greater than towers, greater than hunger, greater than betrayal. Then he opened his eyes and watched as the enemy's camp shifted into a new posture. Not patience. Not siege. Wrath. Shahanshah's men began to drag the siege tower forward despite its burns. The wheels creaked, chains clanked.